The story begins with a guy running into the temple and loudly saying that he is already here, and it is no longer safe here. They need to leave here immediately. The man looked at him and asked who he was talking about. The guy asked with a very scared look if he had not heard of Humite Street. The executioner Leakin, the vampire killer, the lord of the blue evil, is heading here with the undead. He will not let the Dark Order leave. The killer will get rid of them in the most cruel way. The man smiled and asked what is there to worry about. After all, the best holy knights are with them. The guy was trembling with fear and said loudly that these knights have turned into walking dead and are approaching here. The main character used magic with a frightening smile and directed his army forward. At the same moment, the guy and the man saw the shadow of the army of the dead and turned to look at it. They all broke through and quickly ran inside the temple. They attacked the two men and they loudly begged for mercy. The protagonist followed them in and the man wondered how this was possible. Zombies were supposed to serve them. The protagonist stepped on his hand and he said in a dissatisfied voice that no matter how hard he tried, God was on their side and he would grant them salvation. The protagonist put a gun to his head and said that it would be him. The man closed his eyes and began to cry and thought that divine energy was seeping through his skin. The protagonist said with a calm face that God's blessing would lead them to hell. Some time ago, people asked if they had heard about the expulsion of the seventh prince. This is a disgrace to the Holy Emperor. How was such a person even born in the Holy Empire? He is an unprincipled scum of humanity. Do they know what happened to the archbishop? The prince harassed the archbishop's daughter and was noticed. He was supposed to accept punishment, but he made a mess in the archbishop's hall. Then the Holy Emperor lost his temper and sent the prince to the land of dead spirits. The emperor sent him there to reflect on his actions, but he only made a noise and attempted suicide after being rejected by a girl. Luckily, he survived. Surprisingly, after that, he became a completely different person and began a humble life in a monastery. Many people in the city are obsessed with him, but even more people are suspicious of his sudden changes. For blasphemy, a demon entered his body. The prince made a contract with the devil. He saw a dead man wandering around the monastery. There are many rumors. What do they think about this? The protagonist stood in front of several living dead and the system notified that he was Alan Elfals, 16 years old, the exiled 7th Prince, Necromancer class. He closed this system window and asked why it kept appearing. It seems that rumors began to spread because of them. If this continues, he may be mistakenly accused of being a heretic, and what will he do then? In fact, he is not Alan Elfals. He used to be an ordinary Korean guy, but suddenly he became the nasty grandson of a holy emperor. He got into his body when he tried to commit suicide. He pointed to the system window that was above the zombies' heads and said that he could see the status window. He used his necromancer abilities to become the guardian of the cemetery. But this was perceived as heresy here. At first he was confused, but then he started to get used to it. Maybe it's time for him to stop already? They worked hard together. One zombie dug a hole, and the other was a gravedigger, and it all ended with placing a tombstone on top of the grave. Alan said with a smile that it was a glorious day. The zombies were happy to hear this and looked at him with a smile. He surprised them very much by saying that it was time for them to say goodbye, however. They were very unhappy about this and made loud noises, and Alan said that they should calm down. He picked up a shovel and said that it seemed like they were furious now. His first life was wild, but he would try to live his second life more peacefully. He approached them and said that they had become close, so he would think about it some more. Do they agree to this? The 3 zombies immediately gave him a thumbs up in agreement. Alan said that they should get to work then. At the same time, 2 guys were walking through the forest, and one of them asked if he heard that. The guy who was pulling a cart with corpses said that he should stop talking already. Or does he want to die like them? They need to get to the prince quickly and asked him to help this damned village. After a while, Alan asked, "Are these the last corpses?" The 2 men agreed and said that they didn't seem to have any more. That's right, everyone ran away and only corpses remained. He felt awkward asking, but could he please go to the village? Alan looked at them and asked why he would do that. The men said that almost the entire village was dead. It seemed like they would be safer with the prince. It seemed that they themselves had not died yet because they often visited him when they were transporting the corpses. Alan looked at them and thought that the blasphemer prince did not have such powers. He was very unhappy that the men grabbed him and said that they were begging him to come with them. What would happen if they got sick too? They were safe with him. Alan thought with a serious expression that there seemed to be a misunderstanding. What did they want from him? After a while, when they came to a village. He walked ahead and said that the village was really creepy. One of the men said that the drains were no longer working, so he should be more careful. Alan turned to them and said loudly that they should stop hanging on him. One of the men said in a scared voice that the amulet should be kept close to the body. Someone ran past them and Alan said that if he were in their place, he would search another house. He heard it and asked what was that. The man said that he shouldn't scare them, it was probably just a rat. Alan went into a dark alley and said that he would check everything out now. The men became worried about this and said loudly that he shouldn't go there, because he can't go alone. He continued walking with a serious expression on his face and thought that he had a bad feeling. He was sure that he wasn't imagining it, it was emitting a murderous aura. He turned around abruptly when he heard a loud sound, turned around and saw a rat that had come out of a hole in the house. He was about to say something, but he couldn't finish speaking, and the rat was looking at him with red eyes. The rat made a very loud sound and immediately after that, many other rats came out of the hole. They all started running along Alan and he asked loudly, "What the hell is this?" "These are zombie rats." He started waving his arms and said loudly that it turns out that the settlement died out because of them. He hit the ground with his shovel and released the magical energy he put into that hit. Right after that, the rats stopped and Alan was very surprised by that. The rats came up to the rats that died after that hit and started making loud noises. They all ran towards him, and he said loudly that he didn't do it on purpose and he didn't want that. The rats attacked Alan and he fell on the ground because of that. His shovel fell into a puddle behind him. It started glowing because of the magical energy, and he loudly told those freaks that they should stop attacking him. Are they trying to kill him? The water from the puddle started flowing towards him, and the system announced that the skill's swamp of death was used. Alan was splashed with water, and he asked with a displeased look what was that. The men came up to him and asked loudly where so many rats came from. The puddle of dirty water turned into holy water. How did he do that and how did he cleanse the rats? The rats must have spread the disease. Alan reached out to grab the shovel and thought that he had just learned that he could use other skills besides raising zombies. He even used Necromancer skills to purify. His body was filled with holy power because he belonged to the grandson of the Holy Emperor. That was probably what sanctified his skills. Holy blood, holy Necromancer, that was why the zombies were so kind. A girl came to them and said that she thought everyone was dead. The men called her Charlotte and said that she lived next door after all. They started waving at her and said that she should come here, it was good that she was okay. Charlotte was hiding a knife behind her back, she ran past the men very quickly and hit them hard. She attacked Alan, but he managed to block it with the shovel. He tried his best to hold back her attack and thought, is she a zombie? He pushed her away and thought that considering she was holding a knife, she had not completely become a zombie yet. Charlotte clenched her teeth and growled loudly. Alan was a little surprised because she asked where her mom and dad were. She ran up to him very quickly and stabbed him again, and he blocked the blow and fell to the ground. His shovel started glowing and Charlotte was surprised because of it. Alan looked at her hands and thought that holy water burns zombie bodies. It would hurt her if he stabbed her. He was able to knock Charlotte to the ground and she fell into a puddle of holy water. She started screaming loudly because of the pain and Alan said loudly that she should endure it because there was no other way out. He continued to hold her in the holy water for some time and after that she stopped screaming. After some time, some villagers entered the building and the old man said that they heard that he cleared out the rats that were in the village. It seemed that he was the one who saved that girl named Charlotte. He wanted to ask him to help them too. Alan was leafing through a book and said that he didn't save anyone. He closed the book, turned to them and said that she was dead. The surprised villagers asked, was she seriously dead? He calmly asked, how was he supposed to save people? He had the blood of the Holy Emperor in him, but he had no powers. The villagers sadly asked what they should do with the village. They had come a long way in the hope that he could save them. Alan asked, who told them that he saves people anyway? He was about to say something, but suddenly a man ran into the hall and called loudly for the prince. He said with a happy smile that Charlotte had woken up and it was thanks to him. She looked tired, so they put her to bed. The villagers were very unhappy because he lied and the man said that it seemed he had a lot of guests. Alan looked away with a displeased expression and said that he didn't care. He stood up and said that it seemed like they would have to agree, he had more divine power than them anyway. He raised his hand and said that he had a condition, however. A system window appeared above the old man, which said that he was Parlock, 75 years old. Mastery of dialogue, gardening and tricks, and also full of doubts. Alan looked at it, and thought that it was interesting. He sees everything about him. He wants his help, but he doesn't trust him because he is a worthless prince. He said that his condition was simple, he was not going to work for nothing, so they would have to give him money and food. They would also have to rebuild this cathedral for free. The villagers were surprised by this and asked, do they have to completely rebuild the cathedral? Alan calmly said that their lives depended on it, but since they did not want to. Parlock immediately raised his hand and said that he agreed to it. Alan surprised them very much by saying that there was one more condition. They had to make sure that the Holy Knights did not find out about this deal. The villagers left, and he thought with a smile that finally the cathedral that was meant for exile would be useful. He told them about the 30 corpses that had turned into zombies. He could solve this. He started looking for something and said that they should get a pitchfork. He took his shovel and said that they had asked him to deal with the zombies. Did they really expect him to fight alone? They could do the hard work while he read the holy prayer. The villagers looked at him with frightened faces and called him a demon. Suddenly other people ran up to them and the man said loudly that zombies had come for them. People started running around the cathedral, and Alan said loudly that they should grab their weapons as quickly as possible. They would have to swing them if they had to. At the same time, a huge crowd of zombies was walking towards the village. Alan was very surprised when he saw them and asked loudly, "Are those 30 corpses?" He turned around and called out loudly for the elder. Parlock said loudly that he saw while running. He admits his guilt. People started fighting against this crowd of zombies. Alan also joined the fight. His shovel began to create holy water and the system notified that the Death Swamp skill was used. He thought that using the skill was not the hardest thing, because he had already been a necromancer before. In order to earn some money, he tried himself as a beta. In that world, he chose the necromancer class, but unfortunately, he died from an electric shock. He passed out and then woke up in this body. Luckily, the skills from the game were transferred too. The divine power changed his body, and it is not that easy to control. Every time he uses a skill, the divine power starts to flow out. Can he fix it? His attention was drawn to a man who fell to the ground and said loudly that he can't anymore. He was trembling with fear and said that he knew that it was a zombie, but his wife was still there. She came up to him, held out her hand, and he asked how he could kill this woman? She was about to touch his face and screamed loudly. Alan ran up to her very quickly and kicked her. Because of this, she fell to the ground and the man loudly called out for his wife. Alan with a serious expression said that she was already dead, so he should stop talking nonsense. The man was trembling with anger and asked what he could possibly know. He pointed a shovel at his wife and said loudly that he should look at her. Her body is rotting and her soul has long been lost. If he wants his wife to suffer, he can run away, and if he does not want, he should stop crying and start killing. He was attacked by a zombie and he was very surprised because of it. He looked up and saw the silhouette of a person high above the ground. It turned out to be Charlotte. She landed in the center of the street and hit the ground with her hand very hard. She turned around and with a calm expression asked the prince if he was okay. She remembered the past and thought that autumn and winter are the times of infection. It seemed to her that it was already in the past and next year they would be okay. She believed her mother's words. Charlotte ran into the house with a frightened look and said loudly that there were rats with red eyes in the street. She was very surprised when she saw that the whole house was splashed with blood and her father, who had become a zombie, had bitten her mother. She was trembling with pain with tears in her eyes, called her name, and said that she had to run away from here. Charlotte was shocked by what happened and called her mother. She was shaking with fear, slowly moving back and continued to look at them. Suddenly, her mother also became a zombie and looked at her with an angry look. Charlotte thought that after that she almost did not remember anything. Street rats and her own parents were chasing her. She tried to protect herself from them with everything that came to hand. After that, she was stained with blood and was sitting by the wall next to the window. Her eyes began to turn red and she thought that the people in the village had become strange. The rats that were trying to eat her stopped paying attention to her. Was she really becoming one of them? Now it did not matter, because no one would save her. She began to cry and thought that if only someone, just one person, would save her. After that, she met Alan, who was able to save her. After that, Charlotte woke up in her room and was breathing heavily because of a terrible dream. She wondered who it was and how she got such memories. A girl came up to her and said that the prince asked her to take care of her. There were zombies outside, so she better stay quiet. Charlotte looked out the window and heard Alan say loudly that he should stop crying and start killing. Someone loudly warned the prince that he was being attacked from behind, and she looked at what was happening with a worried look. After that, she opened the window wide, was about to jump, and the girl asked loudly what she was doing. After Charlotte punched the ground, she looked at him and thought that she would save them. After a while, Alan looked at something with a very displeased look and said that this can't be. He looked at the pile of defeated zombies and asked how she dealt with them alone. He looked at the villagers throwing Charlotte up and thought that they should praise her even more, although he was the one holding back the zombies. It seems that the purification before turning into a zombie somehow affected her. He doesn't even know what kind of ability he has. Alan approached the villagers and said that they need to deal with the remains of their relatives. He knows that they are tired, but it is better this way. They suffered, and they freed them from pain. The people began to cry and said that they will help with the ritual. After that, Alan began to perform the ritual and thought that the ritual is quite simple. You need to bury the dead and wish them peace, so that the spirits do not wander around and rest. That is why he was banished here. He looked up and thought that in the spirit lands themselves, there is a high chance of zombies appearing. Someone had to deal with the dead. This is all quite strange. He has never heard of so many villages being destroyed at once. However, it is still too early for a wave of death. Alan called the elder, approached him and asked if everything was calm in the village. Did he notice anything strange? Parlock said that there was nothing like that. The infection started spreading about a month ago. Alan said that this means that it is quite possible that this is planned. He was about to say something about a necromancer, but he couldn't finish because the villagers were very surprised and asked loudly, "What did he say? A necromancer, is it a murderer who spreads infection? A demon that captures spirits?" Just the thought of it makes him angry. Alan covered his ears with his fingers and thought that he didn't want to discuss them. If his theory was right, whoever was controlling the zombies should be nearby, but how could he find him? He waved to them and said that he was going to sleep and that they should take care of the rest. The villagers looked at him and thanked him for what he had done. Alan went to his room and said that he used to be a simple worker. He lay down on his bed and immediately began to fall asleep and thought that he needed to rest, because the funeral was hard. The next morning, Alan woke up because someone was shouting loudly in a dissatisfied voice. He opened the window and asked what had happened there so early. The villagers surprised him greatly by loudly saying that the zombies had stolen a man. Alan went outside and asked if what he had said was true. One guy nodded his head and the second agreed and said that they had seen it with their own eyes. They took the opportunity, because the villagers were tired after a sleepless night. Then the people saw a zombie running away with a person who was loudly calling for help, and they called Morian. Alan asked with a puzzled look who she was. The guy said that she was a young girl who collected herbs. She used to help the villagers a lot, and after she helped the wounded. Alan did not listen to him and asked if he knew her. This question worried the guys, and one of them said that she was beautiful and refused the prince. Alan was embarrassed because of this and thought, are they talking about this again? The guy said that from such an insult he almost hanged himself. He did not listen to him and said that he already remembered himself, so they should shut up. The guy said that they need to form a search party and go look for her. Alan thought with a displeased look, are these idiots so worried because she is beautiful? However, he needs to check, because he sees a zombie steal a person for the first time. He needs to clarify what the matter is. He asked calmly, is it possible to track them? The guy said that Gantz, a hunter from their village, might be able to help. Alan said that they should set off then. They should also tell that hunter to come immediately. He looked to the side and noticed Charlotte standing next to him. Alan noticed that she was staring at him and wondered if she held a grudge against him. He started running down the path and said loudly that they should hurry, because if they hesitated, she might turn into zombie dinner. Charlotte was a little embarrassed by this and looked at him silently. After a while, the hunter said that the zombies walked by dragging their feet on the ground, so they were easy to track. They were sure that they came here. The guy said that it was no wonder, it was so cool here. Alan called out to Gantz and said that he did a great job. He looked to the side and thought that he had tracked them well. The cave was full of ominous demonic energy. It is quite possible that this place is infested with zombies or is the source of the infection itself. Although there are places with a natural accumulation of demonic energy, judging by the behavior of the zombies, there is a high probability that someone is behind them. Alan asked if it is worth burning this place to the ground. The guy with a worried look said loudly that Morian is there. He turned to him and said that, however, it is very gloomy here, In such places the undead buffs are much stronger. If everyone runs inside for one woman, then everyone will die. The guy looked at him with a puzzled look and asked then how should they save her? Alan said that they need to prepare better and go back. Of course, the probability that Morian is alive will become lower. He heard a loud sound, immediately turned around and asked what was that. He was very surprised when he saw a huge bear in front of him, which was already next to him. This monster bit him on the shoulder, he screamed loudly in pain, and the people immediately ran to him and loudly called for the prince. The bear ran away from the others very quickly and carried Alan away with him. The monster threw him down, and he thought that this bear was also dead. He waved the shovel with a worried look and the system notified that the skill Swamp of Death was used. He sprinkled the bear with holy water and this monster screamed loudly because of the pain. Alan grabbed the wound on his shoulder, and the system notified that the skill Terrifying spell was used. He began to heal his hand and thought that as expected, this is healing. His divine powers are almost at zero, and such moments are best to change skills. The bear came down to him, stomped loudly, and this attracted Alan's attention. He looked at this monster, and the system notified that it was the king of gluttony, age unknown. The ability to bite, crush, cut, and gnaw at organs. The condition is enhanced by necromancy. Alan wondered, did he become stronger because of necromancy? It is not surprising that he holds on even after holy water. However, if a necromancer controls him, it will be problematic. How is he supposed to defeat a bear with his bare hands? Suddenly, the bear ran towards him very quickly, tried to bite, but Alan managed to jump to the side. The bear immediately swung its paw very quickly to attack again. He did not have time to finish this blow because Charlotte jumped on him from above and plunged a knife into his eye. The bear immediately raised its head and began to scream loudly. Alan looked at her with a surprised look and wondered, did she follow him? Although now it does not matter. He loudly called her name and said that she should hold this freak. Charlotte was surprised because of this and loudly asked what he said. The bear easily threw her away and she hit the ground hard. She managed to roll and the bear hit the ground with his paw. She looked at this monster, who was standing in front of her with his mouth wide open. Charlotte managed to put the knife in front of her and plunged it into the monster's head. Her hands were shaking because of what was happening and the bear was making very loud sounds. Alan managed to run up to her and hit the bear hard on the head. Charlotte looked on in surprise as the monster was thrown a long distance away. He extended his hand and said that he was grateful to her for buying him some time to regain his skills. She also held out her hand and said that she should thank him. Charlotte noticed that it was a zombie's hand and this surprised her very much. Zombies began to rise from the ground and Alan said that this is how you need to win. She looked at the crowd of zombies that crawled out of the ground with a worried look. He said with a sly smile that with such a number this monster had no chance. All the zombies he summoned immediately attacked the huge bear, and he screamed loudly because of the pain. Suddenly, this monster struck very hard with its paw and threw several zombies into the wall. Many zombie arms started to emerge from the ground again. Alan was breathing heavily because of fatigue and thought that this bear had killed many people and he had managed to summon many zombies. This bear's vitality was definitely much higher than his zombies. The bear defeated all the zombies he had summoned and came very close to Alan, who was standing calmly in place. Charlotte stabbed the monster in the head, and it immediately began to fall to the ground because of it. She looked at this monster with a calm expression on her face, which was lying on the ground and not moving. Alan stood in place with a very tired look and thought that the outcome of the fight was obvious. Charlotte noticed that he was feeling unwell and called out loudly for the prince with a worried look. She put his hand on her shoulder, offered to help, and asked if he was okay. Alan said that he was fine, he had just used too much divine power. He wondered what she was doing here, and why she had followed him. He called her by name, and said that he had shown her all his power. However, he wanted to live quietly, so he would like to ask her to keep this a secret. In Charlotte's eyes, he was handsome and had a calm face, but in reality, he was very sick and thought that he would not really bother her anymore, so she should leave him alone. She said with a serious look that he was her savior, so she would fulfill any of his wishes. Alan was about to ask her something, but at that moment, a group of people came and loudly called them. The guy with a worried look loudly asked why they jumped there. Is he okay, right? They took equipment with them to explore the cave. They started to go down to them, and Alan thought that everything was fine, so they can go back, because they can help anyway. The guy who went down first was very surprised by what he saw and asked who dealt with the zombie and the bear like that. Was it the two of them? This bear is known as the king of gluttony. No one knows how many people have already suffered from it. Their attention was drawn to the fact that Alan said that he thought there was a necromancer in the cave. He tried to turn the cave into his refuge and killed the bear. When they arrived, he was already dead. The guys said that this is logical, and necromancers are scary. Alan thought that they were so simple, probably Morian was already dead. The necromancer tried to lure them here too, so that together with the bear they could kill more people. The guy asked with a worried look, what should they do now? Alan said that they needed to go further. The guy asked, was he absolutely sure about that? He agreed with a smile and said that he needed to see how good this necromancer was. After that, they went further into the cave and he said that it seemed like there was nothing to be afraid of. They reached the entrance and looked out from behind the corner. The guy was a little surprised by what he saw and told the prince that Morian was there. The guys immediately ran to her, called her name loudly and said that they came here to save her. Alan looked at her with a surprised look and thought that the necromancer used her as bait to make it easier to kill her and take control. He had a guess about her and a system window appeared in front of him. Morian called the prince with a kind smile and asked if they all came to save her. Alan quickly walked up to her and suddenly hit her in the face with a shovel. Because of this blow, blood flowed from her mouth and it surprised everyone who was present. He said with a calm expression and said that it was his fault, he should have hit with the sharp part. The guys walked up to Morian and loudly asked if she was okay. One of them turned to the prince and asked what was the matter. Alan said that he could see everything. The system window said that it was Morgana, 63 years old. Skills: honey trap, necromancy, curse and murder. He thought with a calm face that Morian was not a bait. Morgana looked at him with a worried look, called the prince, and said that he must have misunderstood everything. Alan said that he was not going to listen to her, they should not be deceived by her, after all, she is a necromancer. The guys were very surprised by this and asked loudly what he said. Alan surprised her very much by saying that it was not her name and age. Morgana said with a frightened look that a necromancer dragged her here and tortured her. Alan asked with a calm look, did she really think that they would believe her for such an innocent face? He took out a small bottle of holy water and said that then she should drink it. If she was a necromancer then her organs would melt, but for humans it was the best medicine and all wounds would heal immediately. Morgana looked away with a worried look and said that he shouldn't give her such valuable things. Alan said that he agreed that it was very valuable, so she should drink it. After that he brought the bottle to her face with a scary smile, and it scared her very much. Morgana looked at his face with a very frightened look and wondered how he guessed. She had a perfect disguise, no one suspected anything while she was playing Morian in the village. How did the prince manage to see through her? What kind of power does he have if he could deal with a bear? Alan looked at her with a displeased look and asked, is she not going to drink this? The prince gives it right into her hands, and she does not lift a finger? Morgan's face began to change, a dark aura emanated from her, and she said that she was going to get rid of him during the death wave. She attacked very quickly and broke the bottle that Alan was holding in his hand. Her disguise finally disappeared, she summoned the dead and said that now he only accelerated his death, and she tried to prolong his life. She said loudly with a wide smile that he will have to die here. Alan quickly defeated the skeleton she summoned and asked, how dare she treat him with such arrogance? They must leave here while he is kind. Morgana didn't notice Charlotte, who quickly came up behind her and asked what was going on here. She pushed her to the ground with one hand with a calm expression and held a knife in the other. Alan stroked the skeleton's head with a smile and said that she had done a great job. Morgana asked loudly with a worried look, who was he and what did he do with her skeletons? Was this shovel the source of his power? Alan walked towards her, agreed and said that they were making good shovels now. She said loudly that this was definitely not an ordinary shovel, it was probably a sacred relic. He looked at her with a smile and said that this was the last thing she should find fault with. She would do better to think about herself. Morgana looked worriedly at the blade of Charlotte's knife, which he held to her throat. After some time, she was hit hard in the face, her hands were tied and she said that her name was Morgana, she was a necromancer 63 years old. The guys were very surprised by this, and Alan asked if she was going to confess. She said loudly that she would tell who ordered to kill him, so she was asking for mercy. He asked, so it was someone's order? Morgana agreed and said that she was ordered to lure him and disguise it as suicide. Alan was surprised by this and thought, so he was forced to commit suicide? Does this mean he was not that pathetic? Morgana was confused by his expression and thought why he was so indifferent. She quietly said that the Dark Church ordered to kill the seventh grandson of the Holy Emperor. With the help of the bear, she realized that he was also a necromancer, and if the church found out about this, they would not let him go so easily. Alan approached her and asked, so she saw him? He called Charlotte and said that they would have to kill her. She agreed and immediately put a knife to her face. Morgana was very scared because of this and said loudly that they should stop. She will keep all of this a secret. She will tell him everything about the Dark Church. Alan, with a wide smile, slapped her in the face and said that if she can tell everything so easily, then it is not worth it. Her fate will be decided by the villagers. The guys with a very angry look looked at her, and he said that there are many people here who have lost members of their family because of her, and sins must be paid for. She begged for mercy and screamed loudly when the guys started to beat her. Alan, with a calm look, asked what he was going to do with her. The guy looked at her and said that she should receive as much evil as she did. The guys started to carry her away, and one of them said that they will torture her to death and then leave her in the forest. Then her body will be gnawed by animals and her remains will become undead. Isn't this a worthy death for a necromancer who mocks the dead? Alan agreed with him and thought that it was expected of them, quite brave. After a while, he put some books on the table, remembered the past and thought that he couldn't find out everything, but he managed to steal a couple of books. He opened one of the books and thought that it would be great if he could talk to spirits, but it seems that he won't get such a skill here. Alan remembered Morgan's words and thought that this woman mentioned a death wave. He needs to read more about this and about the murder. Are his brothers behind this? Since he is a prince, maybe they tried to get rid of a competitor for the throne. Alan closed the book and said that this is a struggle for power. How confusing everything is this the reality of a member of the royal family? What if he really gets killed? He thought that he needs to improve his skills as soon as possible. Charlotte thought with a slightly worried look, will His Highness be killed? Everyone says that the prince has changed. He is not very big, but he is always the first to rush into battle. He single-handedly saved many lives and even held a funeral. He remembered that one of the villagers had said earlier that while she was recovering, the prince had been taking care of her parents' bodies. Currently, Charlotte clenched her fists and thought that he had saved her and her parents. She wanted to thank him, but it wouldn't be enough. She looked at the books he had brought and thought that it was dangerous to be around him, but right now he needed protection. She picked up a book called The Imperial Swordsmanship Manual and thought that then, in order to protect the great prince, she would have to become stronger. Alan read the book and thought that the undead evolve over time. When zombies' bodies decompose, they turn into skeletons, but if they manage to keep their bodies, they become a stronger version, ghouls. A ghoul turns into a Dullahan, he into a vampire. The more they evolve, the smarter and stronger they become. When zombies are in the dark, the mana accumulated in the darkness triggers the evolution process. That's why these creatures strive for strong mana. Thus, the place where all zombies are summoned is called the Land of Dead Spirits. In order to prevent their flesh from rotting in the warm weather, these freaks go to dark and cold places. When winter ends and winter comes, the cold period comes, and the desire to find the Land of Dead Spirits reaches its peak. These times are called the Death Wave. December 25th is the coldest day of the Death Wave period, the day that the king of the Land of Dead, Amon, died. This is the day when all the undead go to the Land of Dead Spirits to get their lives back. Alan closed the book and said that there was about a month left until the Death Wave. He thought with a slightly worried look that this witch was planning to kill him with zombies. Charlotte came to him, called His Highness, and said that she would help him if he gave her this. Alan agreed to it and gave her the book he was reading earlier. He watched her leave and thought that he didn't even ask her, but she continues to come to the church every day. Not only does she sort the books, but she also cleans, takes care of the cemetery and cooks food. He closed his eyes and thought that she would probably leave sooner or later. As far as he knew, Grill adopted her, so now she has a home to come back to. This idiot looks sloppy, but he's a good guy. Suddenly, the door to the church opened and several knights walked inside. Alan was surprised when he saw them and asked what they were doing here. A system window appeared above one of the knights, which said that his name was Harmon Dien, 33 years old. Second in command of the Holy Cross Knights, Holy Family Sword Art, Helmet Defense. He said with a calm expression that he had heard that he had captured the Morgan Witch. Alan looked thoughtful. He decided not to even greet him, treating him like an exiled prince. Considering that he had already heard the news, that meant he was being watched. He agreed and asked, "They captured her with the villagers, what was the big deal, was there any problem?" Harmon said that they had come to confirm, but it seemed to be true. He had fought together with the villagers? Alan looked at him with a calm expression, remembered the past, and agreed. Harmon asked, "They also killed the king of the beasts with gardening tools? Also, a man named Grill killed 30 zombies and cornered a witch with holy water?" He told them all about it himself. Alan thought that it hadn't even been 5 minutes since he had praised him. Harmon smiled and said that to be honest he thought it was an exaggeration, but when he saw the traces of a fierce battle he realized it was true. Alan thought that if he was a holy knight he shouldn't be so trusting. Harmon asked if he knew that Morgana belonged to the Dark Church. Alan agreed with a thoughtful look and said that he heard it from her. She spoke as if it was some kind of secret, but it seemed to be a well-known fact. Harmon agreed and said that it was an evil organization. It had already managed to destroy 5 villages. Alan was surprised by this and realized that he was an idiot for not knowing about it. Harmon asked, "Did they really get rid of her?" Alan asked, "Didn't they hear about it?" She had already been killed and her body thrown away. He asked the prince if it was his doing. Alan asked calmly, "What kind of power does one need to have?" He thought that of course he was the one who dealt with her, but he shouldn't reveal his powers. The villagers had helped him, so it was better to stick with Grill's version. He pretended to be surprised and said that he had been so scared while he was there. All the knights looked at him with disgust and Harmon thought that just thinking about it made him want to vomit. He coughed and said that then he must not know about the witch's magic books. They were supposed to take the books on dark magic, but for some reason her bookshelf was empty. Alan said with a smile that maybe the villagers burned it because of the sinister aura. He could ask them about it. Harmon took out a small bag and said that the last thing left was, but not the least important. Morgan's reward was 80 coins. There was a good reward on her head. Alan reached out to take the bag and said with a smile that he was just doing his duty. Harmon said that he would need to share with the other villagers. Alan agreed with a sly smile, and said that the surprising thing was that he received books and gold. He opened the bag and Harmon said that his business was finished here, so he begged him to forgive him. He should pack his things. Alan was very surprised by what he said and turned to him sharply. He asked, he was already banished once, and now he was being banished again. Harmon sighed and said that a death wave was beginning, they would escort him. Alan thought with a surprised look, were they continuing to take care of him because he was a prince? He asked, if they evacuated, would they send him back to the Imperial Palace or to the warm south? Harmon refused and said that he would go to the Lonia estate. It was half a day's ride from here, they would be in the land of the dead anyway. Was there any point in evacuating at all? The estate, a fortress, was built to stop the death wave. They had gathered soldiers and prisoners to fight off the zombies. There will be many victims, so he asked for the funeral to be held at the Lonia estate. Alan and Charlotte thought about his words and stood there with very dissatisfied faces. After a while, Janet Lappin, 43 years old, feudal lord of Lonia, Viscount. Features sociable and merciful. He asked the prince with a kind smile how he felt. Alan said with a dissatisfied look that he was not very well. Janet asked if the journey had been difficult. He started to leave, agreed and said that the carriage had been very uncomfortable. The Viscount noticed the other people who had gotten out with him and asked who they were. Grill said that he was someone good. Charlotte stood next to him and said that she was an assistant. Alan looked away and thought that considering that he was in exile, he was treated quite well. He said that they should stop talking and take him to his room. He looked around and wondered, however, why had he come here? The land of the dead spirits of Lonia, this is the so-called sacrificial fortress. This place is so called because of the sacrifices that want to ease the wrath of the dead. The castle is protected from the death wave only by the erected walls. It will protect against zombies for a month. Just until the spring after the death wave. Alan saw many chained people walking in a row and asked, will all these prisoners be sent to the front lines? Harmon agreed and said that from him they only needed help with the wounded and holding funerals. Alan looked at him and said that it seemed like he could help with that. He was very surprised because Harmon said that every year there are at least 2,000 or 3,000 dead here. Alan asked if he would have helpers. He calmly said that they had about 80 priests who could perform a purification ritual. The soldiers would help with the funeral, so he didn't have to worry. Sometimes people die from overwork, but that's normal. Alan looked at the Viscount who was standing next to him, and called him. He said loudly with a displeased look that he wanted a drink. In such circumstances, he simply could not survive without alcohol. He would rather die from it than from hard work. Immediately after that, they began to bring him bottles of alcohol, and he loudly told Charlotte that she should have fun with Grill for now. He took 2 bottles of alcohol and said that they should return before the death wave began, because they still had to protect him. Alan entered the room, closed the door behind him, and said that he was going to rest. Charlotte stood still and thought that the prince should trust them. Harmon thought that he had become quite mature. Alan stood with his back to the door and thought that he had played well. Of course, he was not going to drink it. He touched the bottle and turned the alcohol into holy water. He looked at this bottle and thought that, however, he could not cope without holy water. It would be better for him to fill the vessels with holy water and drink it to cheer himself up. If he continues to transfer energy into the water, he will learn to control the power better. Alan's attention was drawn to the gun hanging on the wall. He picked it up and thought that he had read that there were guns in this world, but he didn't think that they were so common. In this world, almost no one uses them and people prefer melee weapons. This is because the world is teeming with monsters, and guns are only used for fun. The thing is that the gun needs mana instead of gunpowder. It can be charged by filling it with mana or holy water, but the mana consumption is too high. That's why experienced mages can only shoot 5 times. It takes 5 minutes to create a bullet with mana, no wonder no one uses it. Alan began to charge the gun and said that in movies, zombies are killed with 1 shot. He needs to create a bullet, aim at the zombie and shoot. He pulled the trigger, fired a powerful shot, and the system announced that he had successfully created a bullet with holy water. Alan looked at the hole in the wall left by the shot with a very surprised look, and the system announced that the divine energy was activated. Everyone heard the shot and called out loudly for the prince and asked what the noise was. After a while, the soldiers looked at Harmon and one of them quietly said that the deputy seemed to be in a bad mood. He was probably worried about the approaching wave of death. And he thought it was all because of the 7th prince. Harmon screamed because he heard what they were talking about. He turned to them and asked with a displeased look if maybe they would rather watch the prisoner instead of talking to each other. They agreed and left immediately. Harmon closed his eyes and thought that they were right about something after all. He had heard a loud noise yesterday. He remembered Alan saying yesterday that they shouldn't peek into a sensitive teenager's room. They were invading his space. Harmon had passed by a hole in the wall, called him an idiot, and said that he was sure that he had broken something. He remembered Parlock saying earlier that he had changed a lot after the suicide attempt, as if he had lost his memory. He had done everything that was necessary at the cemetery and had even fought against a squad of zombies and saved them. Harmon looked up with a thoughtful look and thought that the villagers were talking nonsense. It was quite possible that he was blackmailing them. How did that idiot manage to defeat such a powerful necromancer like Morgana? It seems like the guy named Grill is really strong. Things are only getting more confusing. It would be better to write a letter of recommendation so he can take the Holy Night exam. He heard loud screams, turned around and wondered, was it the prisoners rebelling again? He ran out from around the corner and asked loudly, what were they doing before the big battle? He was very surprised when he saw Alan holding a shovel to a guy's throat. He looked at him with a very displeased look and asked, does he really not know who he is? The day after arriving at the Lonia mansion, people started dying from illness and overwork. Alan was digging graves and thought that it was no wonder they cared about him so much. He just wanted to put him to work. He had a mask and the system announced that it was a bird beak mask with a cleansing spell cast on it to prevent infection. Alan wiped the sweat off his face and thought, isn't time running out yet? It seems like the zombies aren't even getting any closer yet. Someone screamed, which caught his attention, and the man said that he was calling the one who raised his head. One of the guys asked with a smile if he wanted to rest for a while. The system announced that it was Hayes Hedron, the eldest son of the Earl. He said that judging by his face, he was a student of the academy. Alan walked up to them and asked, did he mention the academy? Hayes asked, isn't he here because of disciplinary punishment? The other guys said that children from noble families can easily get an exemption. It's obvious that he's just a guy from a village on the outskirts. If he wants to live peacefully and quietly, then he better listen to him. After all, he is the eldest son of Earl Hedron. Hayes said with a smile that he wouldn't have come all this way if he hadn't been looking for a servant. He pointed to Charlotte and said that she would do. Alan said her name and he asked, so she's his servant? He liked her because she looked pretty good. He said he would take care of her, but she ran away in fear, and then made him raise his hands. Alan started to leave and thought that he would rather dig graves than talk to these idiots. Hayes noticed this and asked if he was leaving already. He screamed and called the servants, which made Alan stop. Charlotte looked at him and asked if he was talking to her. Hayes agreed and said that she should come here. He grabbed her hand and said that it would be better if she had fun with them, and not with her busy master. Charlotte refused and said that she had no time for that now. Hayes asked with a smile, didn't she understand what was going on? No one was going to have fun with such a commoner. He did not have time to finish and began to scream loudly in pain because Charlotte squeezed his hand too hard. This surprised his friends very much, and they called him loudly. Alan watched calmly and thought that she could have broken his arm. Hayes looked away with a displeased expression, insulted her, and asked loudly if someone like her had nothing to show except strength. Alan sighed calmly and said that she should stop. They were both very surprised when Hayes said loudly that she showed what monstrous freaks her parents were. She must be a lot like them, considering that half of the dead people in the country become zombies. Her parents were destined for the same thing. Alan was very angry about what he said, walked up to him and swung the shovel. He stuffed the shovel into the ground next to him, and Hayes was very scared because of this. He reached out his hand with a very scared expression and tried to ask something, and Alan said that he made a little mistake while digging the grave. Hayes was about to ask something again, but he immediately hit him in the face and said that his hand slipped. Because of this blow he fell to the ground and his friends loudly called his name. Hayes with a displeased and scared look asked if he even knew who he was. Alan leaned over to him, put the shovel to his throat, and asked if he knew him. Harmon walked up to them and loudly said that he should stop. He pushed him away and loudly asked if he was going to cause trouble again. Hayes said his name and loudly said that he had hit him so he needed to be punished. Charlotte with a worried look said that it was not like that. Alan raised his hand and used magic called silence. Harmon was very surprised by this, and thought that he could not say anything. Was this a spell that used holy power? Alan with a calm look looked at him, called his name and said that he should tell this idiot who he was. Harmon said his name, and said that he was the 7th prince, and the grandson of the Holy Emperor. Alan looked at the frightened Hayes with a calm expression, and asked if he now understood whose maid he had been so rude to and to whom he had not shown due respect. He noticed that he was shaking from fear and said that he need not worry so much. He smiled and said that if he sincerely apologized, there would be no problem. After some time, Alan was locked in the dungeon. He asked if there was a problem, right? Charlotte stood next to him and said that according to the Holy Knight, the injury inflicted on the son of a nobleman cannot be forgiven. She asked for his forgiveness, because it is because of her that he is here for a week. Alan calmly said that all this happened because of that rude freak, she need not worry. He will spend time here reading. He looked out the window and said that this is better, there is a blizzard outside. One of the soldiers ran to Harmon and called for a deputy. He said that they had ordered the prisoners to clear the snow, but the blizzard was so bad that they were unable to keep up. Harmon ignored it, and wondered if the 7th prince even knew that he had cast a spell. He was certainly good for nothing, but the blood of the Holy Emperor flowed through his veins. The soldier called for his deputy again and Harmon heard him. He turned around, agreed, and said that they needed to continue clearing the snow to maintain the height of the fortress walls. He looked away and said that it had become freezing, but there were not many zombies. The Holy Emperor killed the King of the Dead Spirits on December 25th. The soldier asked if they should report this to the Holy Emperor's family. Harmon said that it was for the best, they should gather the prisoners. They needed time to gather themselves. After a while, the prisoners entered the fortress and the soldiers said loudly that they should close the gates. They noticed the wounded and called loudly for the priests, and said that they should help them quickly. The guy said that the zombies attacked from behind and they couldn't find them because of the snowstorm. He raised his voice and said that everyone who was behind had already been eaten. The soldier said loudly that everyone should gather and take positions, they should climb the walls and prepare for battle. Harmon looked down from the wall and thought that this was why it seemed quiet here. The day of the death of the King of the Dead Spirits, Aman, was coming soon. The zombies simply couldn't help but appear. Very soon there would be at least 3,000 dead people here. However, how did this happen? No one could have imagined that the zombies would attack from behind. Were they really suppressing their instincts by hiding under the snowdrifts? The undead are dead people, they are not afraid of anything and rely only on instincts. Since they do not wear equipment, and do not use any strategies, they dealt with them easily every year. Harmon saw a crowd of zombies walking towards the fortress, and said that this is an impeccably prepared army. He thought, this has never happened before, what is this? He was very surprised when one of the monsters loudly called out to people, and said that they should be afraid and wait for their death. Their fear is justified, because he is the judge of this world, the Messiah who will save this world through death. He is a follower of the god of death Udai. The system notified that this is a vampire count, age unknown, can deprive mana with a bite, an arrogant necromancer. At the same time, Alan was sitting in his cell and thought that it was very noisy outside. For some reason, they are delaying the food. What happened there? He went to the window and asked how they dared to leave the prince hungry. Genid came to him and loudly called His Highness. Alan turned to him and said that he was not trying to escape from prison. He said loudly that he should get out of here quickly. He went to the bars and said that he was still under arrest. Genid said that it was not the most important thing now, since there was a whole squad of the dead outside. Alan asked, so they were short of workers, right? He said that was not the case, there really was a whole horde. The vampire brought a regiment of zombies with him. Alan asked, maybe they imagined it? What was such a high-level monster doing here? Genid said that this monster spoke their language and it controlled other monsters. It was definitely a vampire. He opened the door to the cell and said that he also did not know what exactly happened. Right now a holy knight was fighting them off. The fortress could fall, so they needed to evacuate to a safer place. He would accompany him. Suddenly, rocks started falling from the ceiling and Alan asked what that noise was. Genid said it was probably a squad of zombies. They should quickly leave through the back door. Suddenly a crowd of zombies crashed into the wall at high speed and they ended up in the cell. Alan was surprised by this, turned around at the sound and asked what was it. Genid, looking surprised, said loudly that this monster had thrown a crowd of zombies at them. The dead had invaded the fortress. Alan, looking displeased, took a shovel and thought that since they were already being attacked here, he was afraid to imagine what was outside. He closed the door to the cell and said loudly that he should quickly come to his senses and go command the soldiers. The more people they killed, the more zombies there would be. Genid was going to run away and said that he would go look for shelter for the residents. Alan, looking worried, continued to hold back the crowd of zombies and wondered what he should do. Before this, he had coped with everything because the monsters were not very high level. However, now there were too many of them. He began to use magic and thought that in such a situation he could only run. He released holy water and the zombies began to scream loudly because of the pain. When all the zombies fell to the ground without strength, Alan opened the door to the cell. He went further and thought that he should take advantage of the moment and quickly go outside. He went through the hole in the wall and immediately heard the loud screams of the inhabitants. He saw a crowd of zombies attacking the inhabitants and soldiers, which made them scream loudly and call for help. The wounded guy who was bitten by the zombies screamed loudly and said that there was nowhere to run. Soldiers with shields stood between the zombies and the inhabitants, and one of them loudly said that they should retreat quickly. They would push them back with their shields. They turned around and loudly said that there was also a crowd of zombies behind them. They were attacked and they screamed loudly in pain. Alan heard all this with a displeased look and thought that he did not know how much longer he could hold out thanks to the holy water. He raised a shovel over his head and said that everything was not going as he planned. He stuffed the shovel into the ground and said that he felt like the goddess Gaia was angry because she couldn't control him. He started using magic and the system announced that a blessing was spread. He created a large amount of holy water and it started falling on the ground. The zombies raised their heads and looked up at the sky and their skin started melting due to contact with the holy water. They started screaming loudly in pain and grabbed their burned areas. The people were surprised by what happened and asked, "Are zombies melting in the rain? They should look at this, the wounds are healing. Is that holy water? Drops of holy water are falling from the sky. It must be Gaia's blessing." The man said that the prince did this. They should look over there, the holy water is surrounding His Highness. Alan was very tired because he used too much power to use magic. The villagers looked at him and asked, "Can he use holy water?" He may be an exiled prince, but he is still the grandson of the hero who stopped the king of the dead spirits, Aman, 50 years ago. The soldier looked at the villagers and asked loudly, "Does any of the villagers need help?" The Lord opened the basement of the mansion. He will take them, they should follow him. The villagers immediately ran to him and said with happy faces that they were alive. They did it. They thanked His Highness while continuing to run. Alan said with a tired look that he only caused it to rain inside the fortress, and he was already very tired. He called the soldiers and said that they did well. They will have to go with him and help the Holy Knight. The soldiers apologized and said loudly that they did not have suitable weapons. Alan pointed his finger at him and said that the undead cannot be disposed of with such ordinary weapons, so he will grant them a blessing. He is doing this for the first time, so he does not know how long it will last. Now their weapons have a holy buff. The soldier looked at him with a puzzled expression and asked what buff he was talking about. Alan said that their weapons were not so useless now, they still had to repay him for saving their lives. The doors of the fortress opened, and he said that they would have to fight for their lives. They saw soldiers fighting zombies outside the walls. One of the zombies noticed them and quickly ran towards the fortress. One of the soldiers struck with his weapon and was surprised when he managed to win with one blow. The soldiers looked at their weapons filled with holy energy, and with surprised faces said loudly that he almost did not even touch the zombies with his weapon. Their weapons really did have holy power now. They ran towards the monsters and said loudly that these zombies were nothing, they would help right away. They began to fight the monsters and they thought that they had a chance to win. They would cope with this, because the descendant of the hero was with them. Suddenly, Dullahan came to the battlefield on a burning horse with a weapon made of dark energy in his hand. The soldiers were very surprised when they saw this monster. This monster released magical energy and hit several zombies that stood in its way. He defeated several soldiers, but one of them survived and fell to the ground due to extreme fear. He looked at the gun that Dullahan pointed at him in horror and said that they could not defeat this monster. Alan walked up to the soldier, pointed the gun at the monster and calmly said that he was sorry. After all, this was his second time, so he did not handle it very well. At the same time, the vampire looked at the battlefield and thought that he could feel the energy of life. There was fresh meat there, which he had not feasted on for 50 years. I wonder how juicy they are? If he turns them into zombies, will the regiment become even more powerful? He has been waiting for this opportunity for 50 years. He has come a long way from a soulless zombie to a vampire. How much distance did he overcome before he gained thinking? Vampires are divided by the mana they possess. He became a vampire not so long ago, so others have not recognized him yet, but he is confident in himself, because he is a count. And he has this, the skull of King Amon. Thanks to this, he can collect such an amount of mana in a couple of decades that without it he would collect at least 100 years. He controls an army of 20,000 zombies. Very soon he will surpass the level of the count and become king. Ordinary holy water does not scare him anymore. These pathetic knights should quickly surrender and become undead. At the same time, Harmond, who was standing on the wall of the fortress, loudly said that they must continue shooting. They need to hold on and not let them break through. With the sunset, the undead become stronger. They need to kill at least one more. If they lose, then the end of the village. He thought that the zombies were already invading their territory. He cannot hand over command of this position, because the army is too close. Will everything be okay with the village? He squeezed the sword in his hand out of anger and wondered, if not, then what awaits them next? At times like these, you wish the Holy Emperor was here. A loud noise behind him caught his attention. Charlotte brought a lot of weapons and said that the village was safe because the prince was with them. So she would protect the place where His Highness was. After that, she threw all the weapons on the floor in front of him. She said that she heard that he wanted the weapons to be carried up to the walls of the fortress. Harmond looked at her with a surprised look and thought that he thought she was just a servant. Even experienced warriors can't carry so many weapons, so where did she get such strength? He said that even a child like her is trying, but he is not weak either. He looked towards the battlefield and thought that they should be able to handle it. At worst, he will break through and cut off the vampire's head. At that moment, a huge monster was putting zombies into a catapult. They looked to the side, saw a ball of zombies flying towards them, and the soldiers said loudly that a whole crowd of the dead was flying into the castle. Harmond stood in front of Charlotte and said loudly that it was dangerous, so she should stand behind. He began to concentrate energy in the sword called Heim, the god of war, and said that he was asking him to grant strength. He was surprised when he saw Charlotte run in front of him and swing her sword. She quickly pulled the sword out of its sheath and struck the crowd of zombies with a very strong blow. Because of this, the ball of monsters split into 2 parts and fell on the wall. She jumped down from a great height and Harmond loudly asked how she did it. He looked at the monsters lying nearby with a surprised look and wondered, did she cut them in half? Zombies killed by this girl can't even get up. The undead can only be stopped by aiming for the head or using a weapon with holy water. What kind of sword does she have? Charlotte ran very quickly across the battlefield and mercilessly killed monsters with her sword. Harmond watched her fight and thought that her tactics were sloppy. She uses muscle power to compensate for her poor sword skills. But this destructive power, this brutal blow, is definitely related to the imperial swordsmanship passed down to the Holy Cross unit. He shouted loudly to get Charlotte's attention, and she immediately turned to him. He asked loudly where she learned this. Was she a member of the Holy Imperial family? Charlotte said that she was just the 7th prince's assistant. This technique was something she learned from a book. After that, she ran away and Harmon said that he did not hear anything. At the same time, the soldier put the box of bottles on the floor, loudly called the priests, and said that when their holy water runs out, they should heal the wounded. Janard asked where they got these bottles from. The soldier looked at him and said that the prince gave them to them. He said that he took the holy water with him just in case. Janard sighed happily and said that they were very lucky. By the way, where is the prince now? The soldier said that after returning from the battlefield, he took the remaining soldiers and said that he would help on the wall. Janard was surprised by this and asked loudly, did he go to battle and then leave again? The soldier said that he thought he had already given him permission to do so. Janard looked away and said that everyone was praising the prince and his holy power so much, it was not that they did not trust him. But will anyone remain within the castle walls? At the same time, on the street, there were several zombies dressed as soldiers and covered their faces with cloth. Alan climbed the wall with these soldiers and was noticed by a soldier standing there. He put on his mask and said that they were reinforcements. The soldier said that it was surprising that someone was still alive. The situation at the main gate was disappointing. Alan said that he knew about this, so they sent some troops to the walls. He thought with a serious expression that there was much more trouble there than here, so no one would look closely. He handed out all the holy water, so he himself did not have enough and was unable to activate the new skill ghost soldiers. He needed to raise the old soldiers, but it was too difficult, so he just used the corpses from the village. If they were caught, it would be the end, so it would be better to hide their faces. The soldier asked this priest, did he come to help? It would be better if he stayed in the rear. Alan said that he had some business on the way. He showed the gun he brought and said that he wanted to use this. The soldier was surprised by this and said that this gun was useless here. Alan pointed the gun at the battlefield and said that this is really the best view. He aimed at the vampire and said that besides, the boss can be seen very well from here. He aimed at the vampire, started releasing strong energy, and said that it was time to let him try Gaia's blessing. At the same time, Harmon came down from the wall and asked loudly, what is going on over there? The knight turned around, loudly called him deputy, and he said that he heard that the evacuation is over. They should let him help. The knight said that fortunately, it had not gotten any worse. The soldiers had suddenly acquired weapons loaded with holy water. Some of the fighters had skills no less than the holy knights. They had arrived as reinforcements. Harmon asked what had happened while they were defending the fortress walls. However, he was glad that the situation had not gotten any worse. The knight said that, however, they still did not know what to do with the vampire. Harmon hit the zombie, who approached them calmly and asked what about ranged combat. The knight said that they had used arrows and stones, but all the projectiles had been blocked by the magic shield. Even if the gun was loaded with holy water, he did not have time to finish because Harmon said that it still would not be able to penetrate the shield created by the vampire. So, it turns out, they would have to break through this horde to get to the vampire? He thought that they could not fight back, so it was impossible. The soldier who was standing next to him looked at something and asked, what is this? They should look there. Ordinary priests are not capable of this. Harmon also looked at the one who attracted the attention of the soldiers and was very surprised because of it. Alan was holding a gun in his hands, which emitted a bright light. Gaia, the goddess of love and mercy, called out. He said that he asked her to send her holy salvation and allow him to use the power that defeats the dead to break through the shield. Harmon looked at him with a very surprised look and wondered who this was. The particles of light reflected the divine face. Obviously, this is a blessing sent by the goddess Gaia. Even the most experienced priests rarely encounter this. He did not know that there were such powerful priests in Lonia. Charlotte came up to him and said that this was the prince. She looked up with a small smile and said that she saw his light. Harmon also looked at him and thought, the prince who opposed the goddess Gaia received her blessing? How can this be understood? If this is really the 7th prince, does it mean that he accepts the love of the goddess? Alan fired a gun and said that this vampire must be afraid of the goddess's powers. His shot flew across the entire battlefield, wounding the monsters along the way, and that energy collided with the vampire's shield. He was very surprised because that shot destroyed his shield and hit him between the legs. Because of what happened, he began to scream loudly in pain. Some time ago, Alan thought that the method of gathering holy power was detailed in the Book of the Holy Emperor. What is noteworthy is that while magicians use spells and mana, priests use prayers and holy water, and necromancers use life and magic power. In essence, he would have to give up life and magic power, but is it worth it? Doesn't he have enough holy water just because he is the grandson of the Holy Emperor? If he could use his powers without sacrificing his life, then one could give the role of a priest a chance. Currently, the vampire screamed very loudly due to the pain, while the place where he was hit was burning. He loudly said that he needed reinforcements right away. Alan thought that because of this shield he had to work hard, but he did it. He was breathing heavily due to the fatigue from the shot, and the soldiers next to them were loudly saying that the zombie squad was retreating, they should help the wounded. Alan thought that he was sorry that this monster did not die, but at least they bought some time to gather their things. He looked down and saw many soldiers looking at him. He raised his hand with a smile and asked if it was time for them to help the wounded. Right after that, he and his zombies started to leave, and one of the soldiers said that this was the first time he saw the blessing of the goddess. Is this some kind of experienced priest? Then the wounded should be healed quickly, they were very lucky. Harmon looked up with a slightly surprised look and wondered, is this really a prince? A worthless guy who deserved to be exiled is capable of such a thing? He turned around and thought, I wonder how a girl with such skills could become an assistant to the prince. Harmon remembered that he did not trust the village elder, and wondered if he really became different after losing his memory. Did he really forget about what happened on this day in the past, and became the same? He means who he was before the death of Her Highness Julia. She is the mother of the first and seventh prince. An ordinary village girl, a representative of two races of the Holy Nation and Southern Aslan. Races that have been in hostile relations for hundreds of years. Because of this, many members of high society simply did not accept her. However, the son of the Holy Emperor fell in love with her with all his heart. They got married, and thus the first prince was born. However, the Holy Imperial family had too much influence, and two ladies of noble blood were assigned to the son of the Holy Emperor. After that, several more children were born, and Julia gave birth to the seventh prince. When the prince was 10, she died. She was attacked by a vampire during a night walk with her sons. Julia tried to protect the seventh prince, but was killed. The first prince, who barely survived that day, began to suffer from the curse of the heart. After that, the kind-hearted seventh prince became emotionless. He heard that he was so shocked that he went crazy. Could a person who lost his memory after attempting suicide really return to his old self? Wait, if he lost his memory, he has nothing to do with the holy power. No matter if he lost his memory or not, why did he keep his holy power a secret in the first place? Maybe he didn't want to attract the attention of the imperial family? Is he planning on taking revenge? He understands well. The imperial palace is not kind to the princes and princesses. The princes had a hard time, since the high society never missed an opportunity to blurt out a sarcastic word. Could it be that the seventh prince wants to take revenge on the nobles and the vampire for his mother's death? What if he planned his exile so that he could become stronger away from the constant surveillance? The Holy Knights have a direct connection to the imperial family, so he understands why he acts like this around them. Charlotte may well be from a good family. Julia has always been kind and sweet. The first prince ordered reinforcements, but he should not have left. He regrets it even now. No matter how hard he tries, he cannot forget the shame of the day he failed to protect them. It seems the seventh prince is planning revenge and is enduring insults and cruelty for this purpose. If the seventh prince wants to avenge his mother's death, then it will take a long time to help him. However, for this, he first needs to deal with Lonia. After some time, Harmon met a soldier on his way and asked if he was patrolling. He received no answer and wondered if he did not hear him because of the wind. It is strange that he is walking in such darkness without a lantern. Maybe he is not a person. He quickly drew his sword and ran towards that soldier. He stabbed with his sword and the soldier blocked the blow. Harmon was very surprised when he saw his face and asked if it was really a zombie. Suddenly, 3 arrows were pierced into the floor near his feet. He looked to the side and noticed several zombies and thought that he was not alone here. This demonic energy is strange, because they emanate holy power. Harmon broke the sword of one of the zombies, swung it to attack and said that no matter what, he cannot leave it like this. He did not finish his sword strike because Alan came to them, noticed what was happening and loudly said that he should stop. Because of this, the zombie stopped. Harmon was surprised and thought that the zombie had stopped moving. He turned to him and asked what was going on here. Alan, with a calm expression, called him by name and said that he should lower his sword. After that, they continued on and he asked if he was finished with the rearrangement of troops. The dead will come soon. Harmon was about to say something, called His Highness, and could not finish. Alan asked, after midnight will be the day of King Amon's death. I wonder if the zombie squad will become stronger? He called His Highness again and asked, so he uses necromancy? Alan was confused by this question, and said that he himself did not know. He thought that he was caught, and this was the end. Harmon said loudly that this is not something that can be talked about so carelessly. Is he already so desperate that he began to learn necromancy? Alan asked what to say if he really does not know. As he already understood, he summoned the undead, but due to memory loss, he really does not know where he got such skills. He just did it to help in the fight. He looked at him with a worried look and thought, will he believe him if he says that he reincarnated? Harmon asked if he made a deal with the devil, then where did the zombies get holy power? Alan said that he is not hiding anything, perhaps he has always been interested in necromancy. Now he's going to tell the Inquisitors about this? Harmon really scared him by saying that of course he should do it. Alan wondered if they would catch him and torture him, or maybe Charlotte would save him. He was very surprised because Harmon knelt down in front of him and said that, however, he wouldn't do it. He looked at him with a calm expression on his face and said that he would help him until the very end. Alan looked at him in surprise and thought, it seemed to him that he hated him, and he wanted to help him? Could it be that the man decided to pull the right strings? He asked. He wasn't going to help him, he just wanted to keep an eye on him, right? Harmon looked down and told His Majesty that was not true. He was about to start telling him about what happened when he was a child, but he stopped. Alan said that he should forget about it. First they needed to do what they had to do. It seems it's time, they won't waste precious time with saturated mana in vain. He turned to Harmon and said that he congratulated him on Christmas and Happy Halloween, as a bonus. At the same time, the vampire loudly told all the dead that their time has come. They must eat the living and reproduce. He promises that they will also become kings. He took a deep breath, opened his mouth wide and released a powerful stream of dark energy. The soldiers were very surprised because of this, and one of them said loudly that they should hold their positions. One of the soldiers was very scared and said that he did not think that he could do it. The part of his face where the prince hit still hurt, and in this state it was impossible to do anything. Genid worriedly wondered if this was the right decision. He saw soldiers in front of him, and crowds of monsters walking towards them. He worriedly wondered if maybe he should retreat instead of redistributing. His attention was drawn to the fact that the soldiers noticed a man in a robe and said that this was a priest. He would definitely save them. Alan began to use magic, called Gaia, and said that he asked for a blessing on them, all those who would fight. The system notified that a skill, a weakening epidemic, had been activated. Because of this, it began to rain, which weakened the zombies and filled the soldiers' weapons with holy energy. Genid was surprised and happy about this and said that for sure, a priest was with him. The soldiers rushed to attack and he said loudly that the goddess Gaia was with them. The soldiers ran forward and began to fight against many monsters. Harmon jumped high on the battlefield, swung his sword and said to the god of Warheim that he was asking him to lend him his power. He slammed his sword on the ground and released a strong energy. The zombies around him were hurt because of this attack and he thought that now the prince had every chance to raise the morale of the soldiers. He could not miss such an opportunity. His only target was the vampire. The monster looked at the battlefield with a displeased look and said that this priest was completely blocking his way. The area where this freak's divine power enters is not restored. He became very angry, got up from the throne and said loudly that he could not hold back his anger any longer. Harmon ran towards him very quickly and began to fill his sword with holy energy. He was about to attack, but the vampire jumped over him with great speed. He landed on a zombie. The skull he was carrying with him started to burn and Harmon said loudly that they have to stop him. This crazy vampire is heading towards the priest. The vampire transformed into a huge monster and asked, are they seriously going to stop him? He grabbed one of the soldiers and said loudly that they can try to do this. At the same time, in the city, Alan ran through the city and thought that he knew that he would try to provoke him first. Just like he can see the flows of mana, this vampire can see his sacred power. It's only a matter of time before he finds him. He better move to a better location. As planned, he uses the dense wall of the territory to prevent this creature from reaching him. He was very surprised when he noticed a huge piece of wall flying right at him. Alan managed to jump to the side at the last moment, and it did not hit him. The huge monster approached him and asked, did he seriously think that this could stop him? He emitted a powerful dark aura and said that he had to die. He began to concentrate energy in his mouth to attack, and Alan said loudly that he knew something like this was possible. In that case, he would use Plan S. He called out loudly for Charlotte, and at that moment, she appeared behind him with a huge rock in her hands. She flew forward with a serious expression on her face, and the monster shot out energy, and a powerful explosion occurred. Alan looked at Charlotte with a surprised look, who used the rock to stop the monster's attack. He thought with a worried look that the monster's magic was too strong, so the wall would not withstand it. She still doesn't know how to properly control her power. At this rate, they would both melt from this magic. Suddenly, Grill ran up to them and also began to hold the wall to stop the attack. He said with a tense look that even though he doesn't know how to fight with a sword, he can still help his daughter. They both tried to hold back this attack with worried faces. Alan started using his magic and asked if he had no power, then how was he going to help? He directed that energy at them, and the surprised Grill called out loudly for His Highness. Alan thought that he couldn't properly contain his sacred power, but if that wall could also be strengthened with divine energy. He called Gaia and said that he was asking for the power to protect these unfortunate people. He was asking for her protection to stop the dead. She should give them love and forgiveness. Since he was praying, he was asking for help for them. He created a barrier of magical energy, and it really surprised the monster that was trying to attack them. Because of all that, there was a very powerful explosion of energy. Charlotte survived the incident, and called out for His Highness and Uncle. She noticed Grill lying next to her on the ground and called out his name loudly. She was about to run to him, but Alan stopped her by putting his hand on her shoulder, and saying that he was okay, he just fainted. He was breathing heavily due to fatigue from using magic, and said that she should calm down. Charlotte turned to him and asked His Highness, what about him? Alan said that he was tired as if he was about to die, but he was completely fine. The monster was in great pain due to the magical energy that engulfed his body and was screaming loudly due to the pain. Alan said that he thought this was his chance. Charlotte said that in his current state, he would not be able to fight any longer. He said that he knew about it, and he also ran out of holy water, so he was not going to just attack. This was their chance to escape. She should carry Jiawylel, they would go underground. Alan ran quickly down the street and thought that the holy power ran out faster than he thought. He was about to say something, but his attention was caught by a skull that was emitting dark energy. He thought that the mana was not gathering near the vampire, but somewhere else. Charlotte looked at him, noticed that he stopped, and called His Highness. Alan went to this skull and said that she should wait, because he needed to check something. He picked it up and thought, is this the skull that was on the vampire's neck? What are the functions of this item? A system window appeared in front of him, which said that this is the skull of the Necromancer King Amon. The user's magic power will increase by 20 to 200% depending on each standard, and the recovery rate will increase by 10%. All magic-related skill effects are increased by 10%. At the same time, the weakened vampire stood up and said that he needed to recover as quickly as possible. He was very surprised when he looked down and asked loudly, is the Necromancer King's skull missing? He ran towards him very quickly and said loudly that he should give it to him. Alan stood quietly in place and thought that after looking at the characteristics window, he understood what was needed to use this thing. He put it on his head and the system announced that the acceleration was unstable due to a lack of sacred power. A temporary strengthening equipment. He created chains of energy and said that he was a legion, the emperor of the Gaia inheritance. The system announced that the activation words were confirmed. Immediately after that, 2 knights appeared behind the vampire and shackled this monster. One of those skeletons said that he could smell death. He was a heretic who broke the rules of this world. For this reason, they were created? He would understand after he heard the order. The system window said that they were sacred knights. Those knights looked at Alan, called him dear lord, and said that they were asking him to give them an order. The vampire was very unhappy about this and asked what was going on. Was he the one who broke the rules? A dead man imbued with sacred power? A dead man with self-importance? He had never heard of anything like this. They betrayed the will of Udai, the god of death. Alan pointed the gun at him and said that he was also a little embarrassed. He should check this beautiful weapon for himself. On behalf of the priest and the holy power, he congratulated him on Christmas. After saying these words, he immediately shot the vampire in the head. Alan looked at the shot head of this vampire, and behind him were the holy knights he summoned. He was tired after using his power to make this shot. He fell to the ground and the knights he summoned began to disappear. Because of this, the monsters that fought against the soldiers began to disappear. This incident made everyone who participated in this battle very happy. Harmon went to the city and came to Charlotte, who was holding the wounded grill. At that moment, an old man galloped up to the fortress and asked if he was too late. He was told that it seemed so. The old man said that he heard that there was a sign of abnormal activity in the land of the dead. It seemed to him that the king of necromancers was revived. However, it turned out that it was an ordinary vampire performing his tricks. Only he has no idea how he collected 20,000 dead people. Lonia is mostly made up of prisoners and local residents. Judging by the way this vampire couldn't handle them, one can conclude that vampires are not that strong. He thought that he had felt a strange atmosphere since their arrival. Traces of a struggle between sacred and magical powers of an incredible scale. If this vampire had so much magic, then what kind of person was able to stop him? The knight asked if it was perhaps one of those who ascribed themselves to priests. The old man said that it would be good if so. Over time, those vampires will begin to mix en masse with humans. It will be much easier if they have the help of a priest or priestess. Another knight galloped up to him and said that the god divided himself into parts for fun, in order to awaken the sacred power in humans. That's why they are difficult to find and not so easy to awaken. The old man said that he knew about it. He just says that there is no one in the castle who can handle this. They must send priests, healers, and alchemists. They must take care of the inhabitants first, and then the prisoners. One of the knights asked him for forgiveness and asked if the seventh prince was there too. Would he like to meet him? The old man began to emit a very ominous aura and asked if he had offered to meet the seventh prince. This scared the knights very much. The old man galloped past them and said that they should go back. He had no need to meet with a child who had dishonored his mother. He called him a cursed grandson, and the system announced that he was Kelt Elfals, 105 years old, Holy Emperor. He said that he was willing to bet that he was now shaking, huddled in a corner of his estate. After some time, Harmon knelt down and said that the seventh prince was hunting a vampire. This surprised the Kelt very much. He rose from his throne and asked what he said. The people who heard it said that every joke has its limits. This is the most delusional thing he has heard in the last few years. The Kelt asked with a displeased look, "Are they talking about the same Alan now?" Harmon looked at him, agreed with his majesty, and said that while they were in the settlement of Lonia on voluntary work, he was hunting for a vampire. The Kelt broke his throne out of anger and said that he thought him a loyal man, but it seems he is not. He asked loudly with a displeased look, "Does he want him to kill him?" The Archbishop, Raphael Astoria, who is 100 years old, said that it seems the Holy Emperor is a little out of sorts right now. However, as he already knows, what he just said could not happen. He is selfish and weak, he has no manners and common sense. How can they believe that he did such a feat? Harmon was sad because of his words and thought that, as expected, being on the seventh prince's side is not that easy. He wouldn't believe it himself if he didn't see it with his own eyes. He told His Majesty that he was only reporting what he saw. Raphael said that in fact, there's a report that the people of Lonia are also protecting the seventh prince. Someone even called him a priest. Why don't they check it out? Because it might be related to the strange energy he felt last time. The Kelt called his name and asked if he believed that it could be the seventh prince's power. Raphael told His Majesty that it wasn't. He was just trying to stop the seventh prince from stealing someone's glory. The Kelt calmed down a little, called Harmon by name, and said that he did not know whether his words were true or false, but each of them should be recognized for protecting the territory of the Lonia settlement. He rewards the title of Count Genid and Holy Knight Harmon. He gives him a small territory of the northwestern region. In addition, he must shorten the period of exile of the seventh prince. After he fully recovers, he will order him to return to the castle. After some time, Harmon came to the door in the castle and told His Majesty that he returned from a mission. The man who was behind the door said that he could come in. After that, he entered the room, took a candle, went to the bed and asked, "Is he better yet?" Luan Elfals, 27 years old, the first prince, said that it was a funny joke for someone whose accidental death would mean nothing. His eyesight and hearing had deteriorated. It seemed that he did not have much time left for such conversations. So he can stop acting like that and come closer. He heard about what happened on the battlefield. Luan called Harmon by name and suddenly grabbed him by the clothes. He said that he protected the seventh prince from his majesty. Protected this trash that defiled the honor of their mother who sacrificed everything for them. He called his name again and asked if he was even in his right mind? Because he looked like a corpse, he decided to side with this freak? He took the wrong path by choosing this idiot. There is no way he will be next. He didn't have time to finish because Harmon loudly called His Highness. He said that he overexerted himself, and he was bleeding again. Luan was very surprised by what he said and was breathing heavily due to anger. He smiled, apologized and said that he knew that he was not that kind of person. He pulled his hand away and Harmon said he didn't need to apologize. To begin with, he and the seventh prince weren't to blame for anything. He was the one responsible for the death of Her Highness Jalisha. No matter what orders he received, he should have stood his ground. Luan said that everyone would have died then. He knew that they only survived because of the spare groups of warriors, right? Although his skin was bleeding because of that curse. He was no more used to him now than he was dead. Harmon called the first prince and asked if he hated the seventh prince. Luan agreed and said that he was asking the obvious. He had disgraced them and was now recklessly living the life their precious mother gave him. Harmon asked what if the seventh prince had intentionally made himself look like an ugly thing. He had hidden his true motives to make sure he avenged Lady Jalisha. He had behaved inappropriately to gain strength, deliberately getting himself exiled. Luan looked at him with a displeased look and asked, "Is he even okay?" It seems like he was injured much more seriously than him. He should just rest for a while if he feels tired. Harmon said that he needs to carry out the Holy Emperor's order. He is going to leave for Lonia soon. Luan looked away with a displeased look and said that if this is the Emperor's order, then it is time for this freak to return. 3 weeks after the Waves of the Dead, at the Lonia estate. Grill stuck the shovel into the ground and asked, how long should he do this? After 3 weeks of hard work cleaning this place can finally be called a village again. So there will be no compensation, right? He wondered, shouldn't they be obligated to help each other in difficult situations in life? There is no way he would leave Charlotte in a place like this. He looked at the box and wondered, are these the things of the dead? If these are the things of those who died centuries ago, then it must not belong to anyone anymore, right? If he wipes it, it will shine like new. They should let him become the new owner of these things. He started rummaging through the things and said that he had worked so hard to help the village. This should be enough as payment. Grill's attention was drawn to a piece of paper, and he asked what it was. It had not aged at all. He picked it up and asked if it was expensive. After some time, Charlotte asked His Highness if she needed to bring more food. Alan refused and said that he had not eaten this much in a long time. She said that he had just finally woken up after 3 weeks. The doctor said that he needed to eat as much as possible. He agreed and said that the doctor said that he needed to recover his strength. He said that the fact that he woke up was already a miracle. The doctor asked His Highness how much of his sacred power did he use up. The amount of sacred power he used could have been enough to turn a person into a cripple. However, he recovered thanks to the sacred power, as well as medicine. It was incredible. His body is still exhausted, so he will have to stay in bandages for the rest of his life. Alan asked if he could become a corpse. Charlotte began to untie the bandages and the doctor asked why he said such creepy things. These are his special methods of treatment. To be honest, the person next to him looks more like a corpse. While he was unconscious, he was treating the girl standing next to him. Sacred power and mana, maybe he was somehow connected to these things? Alan asked what it is there any problem? The doctor said that in normal cases, people can be cut, have limbs cut off, or even killed. An ordinary body does not develop like this person's? It was as if he saw His Majesty 50 years ago. While His Majesty was in a coma after being defeated by Aman, the king of necromancers, his body received enormous damage from the sacred power and mana, so he heard that he had to be put back together piece by piece. At that time, his body developed beyond any human limits. He heard that the reason why His Majesty was able to defeat Aman was because of his superhuman body. Does this person have the same strength? Alan looked at Charlotte, and a system window appeared, saying that she is a hard worker. High concentration, superhuman body, and more. She will do anything to help him. She was a little worried about this and asked what was wrong with him. Alan thought that people like this should be heroes, not a weak person like him. He said that he was a little bored, so he wanted to read books. Can she bring it? Charlotte agreed and started to leave, and he thought that it was good that he had Aman's ability, but the backlash was too big. His body can't handle it. Sacred power needs to be used often, but it's hard to do because of the completely different mana. So he needs to start with theory. Charlotte brought him some books, authored by Rafael Astoria, which are called Theory of Magic from the Sacred Emperor, Sacred Power in Dawn, The Doctrine of Resurrection. Alan started reading and thought that it was good that everything was written in such detail in the book. In this book it was written that he dedicated this book to the great goddess Gaia. This confused Alan a little, and he thought that his faith was so strong, like that of an occultist. In any case, he will quickly learn to control his sacred powers and use zombies correctly. He heard a knock on the door and said that they could come in. Harmon entered the room and told His Highness that he was glad that he had woken up. Alan said that he was wondering who had come to him. Several days had passed since his awakening. He heard that he was in the castle. He came back earlier than he expected. Harmon agreed with His Highness and said that he had news, so he hurried to come here. Alan thought he gave him a huge reward while they were in the village. Will he do the same this time? Maybe he will give him money or leave. He waited for him to say with a happy look, and Harmon said that His Majesty gave a personal order. He ordered him to come back. This news shocked Alan, and his face changed dramatically. After some time, Harmon was thrown out the door. He called His Highness and said that he needed to go back. Charlotte said that it seemed like someone was calling him. Alan said that she should ignore him. Harmon continued to stand at the door and call His Majesty. Charlotte asked, "Does he not want to go back to the castle?" Alan said that of course he does not want to. Why should he want to go back to such a dangerous place? He thought that he still didn't know who was behind Morgan's case. As expected, he should have asked her before killing her. Charlotte stood there with a little sadness and thought about the danger. Alan said that in any case, he would take care of it himself, so she could just ignore him. But even after that, Harmon continued to ask. After that, Charlotte came out of the room and said that this was a message from the prince. He asked what the seventh prince said. Had he finally decided to return to the castle with him? Charlotte said that he asked to convey that he must get lost until he sprinkled salt on him. After that, Harmon asked if she was going home. She agreed and said that she would stay in a hut with her father outside the castle. He said that she should let him see him off, because it was already night outside. Charlotte politely refused and said that he didn't need to do that. He said that he just wanted to know the reason why the prince continued to refuse to return to the castle. Maybe she knows something? Charlotte said that he said that the castle was a rather dangerous place. Harmon thought about her words and said that the prince's position there was really not the best. She thought with a displeased look that, as she thought, even his relations with his relatives were not the best. Someone wanted to kill him. If only she were stronger. After that, she came to the village and was met by Grill, who waved to her and said that she had come quite late today. Wait, is that Mr. Knight? Harmon asked if he had fought here too, like earlier in the village. Grill was embarrassed by this and said that of course he had, because they should help each other. He was about to go into the house and Harmon said that it was very commendable of him. If he didn't mind, could he tell him what he did in the battle? Charlotte went into the house, and Grill said that he had only killed 50 large zombies. He also managed to take the fangs of the vampire count. She noticed something in the house and asked what it was. She brought the piece of paper he had stolen earlier and said that there was a document on the dining table that she had never seen before. Grill said that you could say that it was his talisman that he hadn't taken out for a long time. It looks so old, right? That's because he hadn't touched it for a long time. Harmon looked at it and thought that it was a family document. Is that the seal of the Harris family? They were the family that protected the northern region of Lonia 50 years ago. The family that was wiped off the face of the earth in a mortal battle with the Necromancer King Amon. There was no one as loyal to the Emperor as they were. What is the document of the bravest family in these lands doing here? Perhaps these two are the survivors of the Harris family? That's right, now he understood where these two got such strength. Even though they are now living in the shadows, due to the fall of their family, but they still care about the prince, although no one even knows. It's because of their endless loyalty to the Emperor. He said that he respected his wish to keep his mission a secret from everyone. Then they would accept this letter of recommendation. He could help his daughter improve her skills. Also, it seemed that they still wanted to be with the seventh prince. Later, he would write them a recommendation to become holy knights. They were both very surprised by what he had just said. Grill asked loudly, would Charlotte really be able to go to the castle? Harmon agreed and said that in addition to that, she could gain the status of an aristocrat. It would not be that difficult to do. If she wanted, they would teach her the art of the Holy Empire sword. Then she would be able to help His Highness even better. Charlotte immediately approached him and said with a serious look that she agreed to it. However, if becoming a holy knight meant that she would have to be away from His Highness, then she would not do it. Harmon said that if her mission was to protect the prince, then he would work harder to protect the prince with her. He thought that he would do whatever it took to escort the Harris family and the prince to the castle. After a while, Alan said that he agreed they could go. Harmon looked very surprised by this and said that he was ready to go to the castle. After a while, they were riding in a carriage along the road and Harmon asked why he had suddenly changed his mind. Alan was sitting in the carriage and asked with a displeased look what he meant. He looked at him and said that only yesterday he was slamming doors in his face because he did not want to go to the castle. A while ago, Alan was reading a book and said that this book was something incredible. How did they even think of using sacred power like that? If he could practice it. In the present, he said that it was because the royal library had all sorts of books. Harmon told His Majesty that it seemed that he had studied magic in depth. Alan said that since he only got rude looks in the castle, he should just lock himself in the library. Harmon said that he could still relax, since it had been a long time since he last visited Lawrence's. These lands were much more fertile than the lands of the dead, so there were many things to do here. Harmon and Charlotte looked out the window at the city with surprised faces, and he said that there were so many people here. She said that it was because it was the capital. Harmon told His Majesty with a smile that the capital had developed even more during his absence. Does he like this place? Alan surprised them all by saying that it smelled very bad. He called Harmon by name, and said that he should let him ask one question. He covered his face with a handkerchief with a displeased look and asked, "Are there any dead people in the capital of this sacred kingdom?" After that, Alan ran down the street very quickly and pushed a woman who was selling fruit. Harmon ran after him, asked her for forgiveness, and said that however they were in a hurry now. Many other people were talking on the street, and Alan ran forward with a serious expression and thought that this street may seem busy, but he was sure that it was the smell of a vampire. If he followed this stench, he would definitely find him. Harmon ran to him and asked His Majesty, did he smell something? He called him again, and Alan saw a head lying on a box. It was the head of a girl who was lying with flowers with tears in her eyes. The color of her skin changed dramatically. She opened her eyes, which were red. Suddenly she opened her mouth wide and began to scream loudly. Alan ran to her very quickly and hit her head with a weapon with holy energy. Charlotte looked at it with a surprised look and asked, was it a dead person? Harmon said that he had heard of similar cases, but this is somehow. Alan didn't listen to him, noticed the body on the ropes and wondered, did the head belong to this body? It looked like the entrails had been removed and only the skin was left. Suddenly, in the alley next to him, someone said that they were being followed. Alan turned sharply to the person who said this, and this attracted Harmon's attention. The unknown person said that it was a red-haired middle-aged man. The man had just run away. Harmon said that then there was a high probability that this was the culprit of the incident. Alan said that was probably true. It was hard to track him down now because the stench had spread everywhere. Harmon said that he would report it once they arrived at the castle. Alan sighed with displeasure and said that after all, he only came here to study magic. However, for some reason, he had a bad feeling about this. He thought that Lawrence was in a state of chaos. It turned out that similar cases of murder had already occurred the other day. On the street because of them, and in the castle, because of the visit of the scandalous prince him. These places had been thrown into chaos for various reasons. As for him, the man who had become the subject of discussion, he had entered the castle in complete safety. Harmon, with a slightly displeased look, said that he begged him to stand still. Regarding this matter, he had already reported, so he could just stand there. Since there was a banquet tomorrow, he shouldn't do anything today. Alan, with a displeased look, said loudly that he had already figured it out. How many times was he going to tell him that? Harmon said calmly that he was still a child. By the way, about Charlotte. He didn't get to finish because she was going to look around the castle. He said that if anyone asked who it was from, she could just say his name. He was the vice captain of the holy troops. Alan said that he would go and lock himself in the library then. Harmon said that he should just go down the hall and turn right at the courtyard. Charlotte said resolutely that she would join him after she finished looking around. Alan said with a displeased look that he really did feel like a child. He walked down the hall and thought, by the way, he thought he was mistaken, but he could still smell the stench. A vampire must have gotten into the castle. Since the smell was quite ominous, it would be better for him to stay quiet, as he was told. Maybe he should just run away after he found the book? Wouldn't it be better to just take the book than to get dragged into all this? First he will go to the library, and he will think about it later. Alan walked along this corridor with a displeased look and said that it seems like he is walking around the same place. His attention was drawn to the statue that stood in the courtyard, and he asked whose statue it was. He came closer, looked at the inscription, and wondered, is her name Julia? From the inscription you can tell that she has been dead for a long time. He was surprised when he heard someone scream loudly because of the pain in their back. He looked out from behind the statue and wondered, is it the gardener? The Celt was sitting next to him, and said that he shouldn't have relied on those idiots. In the end, they made the old man do everything himself. Maybe he should cut their necks and use them as decorations? Alan was scared because of this and wondered, is he a murderer? The Celt asked how they can be so lazy, although they are paid from the taxes of ordinary people. He turned around and said loudly that if he had come he should have come and greeted him. He should bring him that shovel and the bag of earth. Alan said with a displeased look that he was not a gardener. Celt said in an angry voice that it seemed that this tree lacked decorations, his head would do perfectly. Alan immediately smiled and said that he would bring everything now. After that he picked up the bag of earth, was very surprised by the weight, and thought that he should have put on the new clothes that Harmon gave him. It seemed that he mistook him for a new gardener because of his clothes. He put the bag on the ground, put down the shovels and asked, is this enough, right? It seems there was a misunderstanding, so he will go. His hands are all in the earth. Does he want him to lend him his handkerchief? He handed him the handkerchief and said that if possible, he should not work alone and ask others to help him. Celt grabbed his hand and said that it seemed like he really had lost his memory. Not only had his personality changed, he couldn't even recognize his own grandfather. After a while, Alan stood in front of the opening door with a very worried look, and someone said that the seventh prince was coming. He entered the royal hall and saw Celt, who was sitting on the throne. Alan stood there with a dissatisfied look, remembered the past and thought that he couldn't believe that it was the Holy Emperor. Celt said that he heard that he took an active part in protecting the Lonia estate. He also heard that he killed the vampire count. Is that true? Alan thought with a slightly worried look that he needed to think about it. Even the people of Lawrence's had heard about this murder incident. So it was impossible for the Holy Emperor not to know that a vampire was behind this incident. So right now, instead of being recognized for his merits at Lonia Manor, he plans to find someone who can catch the vampire. While he checks the details of the case, he agreed and told His Majesty that it was he who did it. However, he wouldn't be able to catch it again by himself even if it died and was reborn. He was only able to do something like this with the help of a lot of people. Harmon, Charlotte, and Lord Gened all contributed in a certain way. He also received a lot of help from the people of Lonia Manor. It wasn't just his strength. He thought that he would just spread the merit to prevent a problematic outcome. Celt said that he understood and heard him. Alan looked at him and thought that he still looked annoyed. Is that all? Celt said that he had come all the way here and was probably tired. He needed to get a good rest. Alan agreed and told His Majesty that then, he hoped that he would be able to finish hunting the vampire without any problems. After that, he left, and Celt thought, did he learn about this from Harmon? Half a year ago, he was a nasty guy, but now he accepts others' help with dignity. He even noticed the existence of vampires in the capital city. If someone loses their memory, then their character completely changes? And about Grill and Charlotte, based on what Harmon said, they are the survivors of the Hirai family. If this is true, then they should be successful in hunting vampires, but the Hirai is not a family known for martial arts and sacred power. The report he received from Lord Gened. He said that the seventh prince saved the lives of soldiers who were on the verge of death with the help of sacred power. There is also a story that the goddess's blessing came after his prayers and that he killed a vampire with a decorative gun. Even though the man was wearing a mask, Gened said that he was sure that the man was Alan. At first, he thought it was nonsense. The Celt asked the people standing next to him what they thought about this. The men said that he was sure that it was a lie. The prince said that he had not been on the battlefield for long. However, they said that the masked man had the same build as the prince. They must have simply made a mistake. Could this be proof? However, if this divine power was due to the blood of the emperor, then how else could it be explained? The Celt thought with a dissatisfied look that he would soon have to give up the throne. But not only did he not have an heir, he did not even have a person who could help him now. If nothing had happened to Jalisha that day, he would have chosen Luan as his heir. It was also his fault that he had become cold, since he began to think more about the safety of the kingdom than about his grandchildren. Maybe this child also had a chance? He continued to think about all this while the men spoke loudly, saying that he said that the seventh prince could not do such a thing. How difficult was it to negotiate with such an old man? Maybe he wants a fight? The Celt said loudly with a displeased look that if they did not want to get punched in the face, they should shut up right now. He loudly called them useless idiots, and a man entered the hall and told His Majesty that he should calm down. It was Count Pomer, an acquaintance of Luan. He bowed and asked, since they still had plenty of time, why don't they investigate this matter better? The anniversary of Lady Julia's death was in 2 months. It would be great if the seventh prince stayed in the castle until then. Since he was going to help catch the vampire, why didn't he rest until the upcoming banquet? The Celt smiled and said that he was right. There was a banquet soon. There was no point in rushing. So they would do. After some time, Alan walked down the corridor and said that he had finally found the library. Why was it so hard to get here? His attention was drawn to the fact that a girl noticed him and called him the seventh prince. He thought that he didn't think there could still be someone here at this hour. The girl apologized and said she would leave right away. Alan calmly said she could stay. After that, he looked at her and thought that she was very uncomfortable. He hadn't even done anything. He remembered what happened a long time ago, panicked and thought that this couldn't be happening. They stood silently next to each other, and the system announced that it was Alice Astoria, 17 years old, the granddaughter of the Archbishop. Specialty: love and forgiveness, incredible sacred power, and knowledge of magic. Alan read it, and thought that it was no wonder she was so uncomfortable. She must be thinking that he came back because of her. Besides, she had the same name as the author of the book he was looking for, the same last name. So the book was written by an archbishop? Alan thought with a tense expression that it was the archbishop whom he called Gaia's slave. He sighed, put his hand on his head and thought that who knew that he had met the author in this way. Now the protagonist could not even dream of asking him anything. Alan, surprised, apologized if he had scared her. He said that he had lost his memory, so he did not remember most of the people in the castle. The protagonist, looking at the tense Alice, thought that this was right. He would not have believed it either if he had been in her place. Alan quickly extended his hand upwards, thinking that he would just take the book and leave here. The protagonist, looking in amazement at the place where the book was not, thought that it was not there. Alice asked, perhaps he was looking for the Archbishop's book? The protagonist turned to look at her and agreed with her. Alice, clutching the book in her hands, said that she had read it, but could give it to him. Alan said that he did not want to distract her while she was reading. Alice, handing over the book, said that everything was fine. In fact, she was going to clean up after herself before leaving. The protagonist took the book about resurrection in his hand and thought that this was a very loud title. Alice looked down with a sad look and said that these were just notes from grandfather's research. There was nothing special about it. First of all, people cannot be resurrected. Alan looked away in surprise and asked why this could not be done. He, holding the book in his hand, asked, is this about resurrection? Why is this impossible? Alice said that no matter how strong the sacred powers give life, it is impossible to catch a soul that has already left the body. Only necromancy can do this. Due to the fact that necromancy requires a huge fee, it is not good to do such a thing. Resurrection is impossible even when Gaia gives them amazing things. The protagonist asked what if someone has both sacred powers and magical powers? Alice looked ahead in surprise and said loudly that such cases are incredibly rare. If you use both powers at the same time, the body can just explode. Alan leafed through the book and asked if that was really true. He calmly looked at the book and said that he still didn't think it was impossible. After all, this was resurrection. Alice squeezed her hand with a puzzled look and asked what he meant. The protagonist said that the book said that if he wanted to use his sacred power better, he needed to pray more. Sorcerers can use mana and spells. For dark sorcerers, they use their magical powers and life. Is there a way for someone to use sacred power better? Alice said that if he was asking about a better way than prayer, then a magical tool could be used. Speaking of the fact that resurrection is possible, he had. Alan, irritated, did not let her finish speaking and said loudly that he had delayed the child with his conversations. It was already late, so she could go home. It seemed that she was uncomfortable with him, and there was no point in denying it. Alice, looking at the protagonist pushing her in amazement, said that it was not that. Alan, looking away in surprise, said that he would definitely turn off the light in the library before leaving. The protagonist said good night to Alice, who was looking at him in surprise. She clenched her fists and looked away, asking what about the conversation about resurrection. Alice, with a knowing look, thought that it must be just something strange from the seventh prince. It seemed that something had changed in him this time. She felt that his aura had changed somehow. After a while, Raphael turned to Alice. He calmly turned to his granddaughter and asked what she was doing. Alice, raising her clenched fist, said that she was studying in the library. Raphael said that she was full of passion, all in him. The granddaughter must be careful, because now the seventh prince is in the castle. The granddaughter looked to the side tensely, raising her hand. Raphael handed her the mask and told her not to strain herself too much. Alice was chosen by the goddess and has incredible talent. The work that she has to do carries with it a great responsibility. The granddaughter smiled, looked at the mask in her hands and said that she already knew it. She clenched her hand into a fist and said loudly that he still should not worry, because she is strong. Grandfather proudly said that here she is, his granddaughter. Then they can go. After a while, they looked to the side with serious faces as they entered the room. Luan, tormented by pain, raised his hand, making sounds. Raphael said that they will begin today's treatment. Alice tensely looked forward and raised the mask to her face. Bright energy surrounded her body, emitting light rays throughout the room. Luan threw his head back with a terrifying look, enveloped in energy, and screamed loudly. Alice clenched her hands, emitting energy from them, and thought that her grandfather had spoken the truth. Against the backdrop of the first prince's cursed body, even her powers were useless. At this rate, he really didn't have much time left. She really wanted to find a way out no matter what it took. Alice closed her eyes with a tense look, recalling the past. The protagonist said that he still thought it was impossible, this whole resurrection thing. She came out of her memories and thought that although she knew it was impossible, she remembered what he said. It would be good if his words were true. After a while, Ellen looked at the sheets of paper and asked, "Is that all? Is there no information about Mom and Dad here?" Harmond, standing in front of the protagonist, asked, "Does he really need this too?" He still remembers them. Alan, sitting on the sofa, put his hand on his leg and asked if the deputy still thought that he had faked his amnesia. The protagonist said that he had really lost his memory, so Harmond should tell him about them. The deputy looked down with a sad expression. He said that when his parents were both alive, they lived a good and ordinary life. Alan looked up in surprise and asked if that was all. Harmond, turning to His Majesty, confirmed his words. The protagonist looked at the tense deputy with a serious expression. Alan thought that he wanted to know about the relationships between family members, but everything looked very suspicious. Since this was a royal family story, the protagonist thought that they would not tell everyone about it. Harmond said that, moreover, there would be a banquet soon. He turned to His Majesty and asked if he was ready yet. Alan, tensely holding a piece of paper in his hand, looked down and asked if he should. The deputy said that if the protagonist did something wrong there, he could be laughed at. Charlotte even learned the etiquette of the castle so as not to disappoint him. Alan asked if he could just enjoy it. Harmond calmly looked down and said that a party and a banquet were two different things. At this rate, what if the first prince came too? The protagonist calmly looked at the piece of paper and asked who it was. The deputy said that he was depicted on the family tree. Luan was Alan's older brother. He was the person the protagonist should be wary of the most right now. At the same time, Luan clenched his shaking hand into a fist and asked if there was really going to be a banquet. He looked up with an ominous look and sighed heavily, and asked if they were really holding a banquet for someone like him. After a while, there was a lot of food on the banquet table, and the musicians accompanied the event with their music. The Lord raised his hand smiling and said loudly that she had grown very beautiful. He was very glad to see her after so long. Alice smiled and put her hand on her chest and said that she was also glad about it. She tensely closed her eyes and thought that her grandfather asked her not to come to the banquet. Alice remembered the past. Raphael said loudly with anger that it would be the same if it was about Harmond or Lord Gennet, but this is a banquet in honor of the seventh prince. She came out of her memories and thought that since her grandfather did not come, at least she should be here. Moreover, he is busy taking care of the first prince. Duke Fomer, standing in the hall, addressed Lady Alice, and she turned in surprise in his direction. The Duke, smiling, walked forward and said that she was beautiful, as always. He would be believed if he said that she was the reincarnation of the goddess Gaia. The man covering his mouth with his hand said that this is Duke Fomer. He heard that lately the Duke is popular with women. The girl covering herself with a fan asked, "Is this really despite the fact that low-ranking people are difficult to please?" The man said quietly that it seemed that because the Fomer had no interest in power, he had made useless volunteer work his hobby. Alice turned around in irritation, clenching her fists, and calling out to the people. The Fomer raised his hands, addressed her by status, and asked her to leave them. He said with a tense smile that they weren't lying after all. After his wife's death, volunteering became the meaning of his life. The Duke shook his neck with his hand and said that apparently it wasn't quite aristocratic. Alice raised her hand and disagreed with him, and said loudly that it wasn't what she meant. On the contrary, he deserved respect. She raised her hand with a tense look and thought it was strange. The Duke was definitely a good man, and had served Lady Julia in the past. Now he supported the first prince, and was completely loyal to him. Instead of trying to gain power, Fomer always worried about the first prince's well-being. He was also a person who always stood up for others. Why was she so uncomfortable then? Alice turned to the side with a smile and put her hand on her chest and asked for forgiveness. She said that she needed to greet the others. The Duke looked at her and said that then he would wait for their next meeting. Alice put her fist on her heart and thought that she didn't feel well. She looked to the side in surprise when she heard the goddess's name being called out loudly. Janet gritted his teeth and shook, saying loudly that as a lord from afar, he was invited to such a place. Giarwilo looked at him with irritation and said loudly that he couldn't be nervous here. Janet should look at him, because he was just a low-status person. Where was the seventh prince? How could he just leave them here? Alice smiled and covered her mouth with her hand, watching what was happening. She walked up to them and greeted them, thinking that it had been a long time since she had attended a banquet. So it would be better if Alice stayed with people she was comfortable with. They looked at her in surprise and asked, "Is she the Archbishop's granddaughter?" Alice smiled and introduced herself, and said that it seemed like they already knew who she was. Janet said that he had only seen her from afar. The Fomorian with red eyes walked among the people and looked to the side. The man said loudly that under the protection of the Empire, Prince Alan was entering the hall. The protagonist looked forward with a serious expression and clutched the cloth in his hand. He quickly looked at the Duke standing among the people, and Fomer looked at him with an ominous expression. After a while, Alan crossed his legs and thought that this was unexpected. He crossed his arms and closed his eyes and thought that since he was a prince who had no rights to the throne and was even kicked out of the castle, he thought that no one would be at his banquet. The people looked at Charlotte standing in surprise. Alan asked why she was attracting attention. Charlotte kept her hands behind her back and looked away. The protagonist looked at her seriously and said that she just looked more aristocratic than him. Were the lessons she took worth it? Harmon kept his hands behind his back and said that the ability to present yourself cannot be learned in lessons. Alan asked what the deputy was talking about. Did he really not have the ability to present yourself? Harmon asked if that was what he said. Did His Majesty really think that? Fomer, smiling, raised his arms to the sides and loudly greeted His Highness, the seventh prince. He greeted Harmon and said that they also had not seen each other for a long time. The protagonist looked at the Duke with confusion and asked who he was. The deputy looked at the protagonist with a serious expression, raising his hand, and said that his behavior was not at all like the prince's behavior. Harmon loudly introduced the Duke. Fomer, smiling, laughed and said that everything was fine. He extended his hand forward and said that so much time had passed since their last meeting that it was not surprising that they did not remember him. The Duke apologized for not being there for the protagonist in difficult situations. Alan, with an alienated look, raised his hand and said that he should not say such things. He shook Fomer's hand and thought that the Duke served his mother in the past and supported her and the first prince. The protagonist remembers few people who supported him. Alan looked in surprise at the system window that appeared. The system window notifies that Count Fomer is a vampire. Characteristics: bloodsucker, black magic, and is currently in a state of thirst. The protagonist, squeezing the Duke's hand, thought that this freak was a vampire. The Fomer, emitting dark energy, asked if Alan liked the food at today's banquet. The protagonist, looking forward in amazement, raised his hand and said that it was delicious. He thought that he had unconsciously released his sacred power, but the vampire did not act. The Fomer, with a smile on his face, leaned over and said that it was a relief for him. After all, the last time Alan tried royal cuisine was a long time ago. The protagonist, looking at him tensely, wondered since when this guy has been in the castle. The Duke, holding his hands behind his back, addressed His Highness. The people standing in the hall had red eyes. Alan looked in amazement at the many windows appearing. The Fomer, raising his hand, asked if he was looking for something. The protagonist, getting up from the sofa, said that if he thought about it, he remembered something that upset him during the meal. The Duke asked what it could be. Alan pointed at the glass of alcohol and loudly asked to give him one. He quickly squeezed the glass in his hand and said that it was, of course, alcohol. The protagonist instantly turned the alcohol into holy water and said that it would be very sad if they did not drink alcohol during the meal. They looked at each other with confidence and smiled. Alan grinned maliciously and turned to the Duke and asked why he shouldn't drink a glass too. Fomer, smiling, took the glass in his hand and said that he would drink it with pleasure. The protagonist, looking confidently to the side, thought that let him drink. Alan put holy power into this water and now it is also holy. The Duke should drink it quickly and show him his true nature. The protagonist is sure that this guy was that silhouette. If Fomer's identity is revealed, then it will become clear who the killer was who committed that murder scene. The Duke quickly drank the glass of holy water. He, smiling, said that maybe because he drank so quickly, he already feels drunk. Fomer put his hand on his head and asked for forgiveness from His Highness, and said that he was weak when it came to alcohol. Alan said that he did not look drunk. The Duke smiled and said that it was because he was not that drunk yet. The protagonist quickly grabbed the bottle of alcohol and asked, "Is that so?" The people looked away in surprise and asked loudly, "What is the seventh prince doing?" Fomer looked in fear at a piece of the bottle rushing towards him. Alan, with a stern look, hit the Duke's hand with a piece of glass with great force. Harmon loudly called out to His Highness and asked, "What is going on here?" The protagonist looked in amazement towards the flying blood and fragments. The Duke, shaking, put his hand on the wound and asked him to calm down. Alan wondered, is he really not healing the wound? Fomer is a vampire, that can't be. The deputy angrily covered the protagonist with himself and asked for forgiveness, and said that it looks like the seventh prince is already drunk. Why doesn't the Duke go inside to treat the wound? Fomer, looking sadly to the side, said that it would be better this way. He then asked to forgive him and quickly ran to the side. Harmon walking to the side, Alan asked why he did it. Charlotte asked if he really felt that something was wrong with the Duke. The protagonist said that it looked like Fomer was a vampire. They looked to the side in amazement and asked what that meant. Harmon, with a stern look, said loudly that then they needed to catch him. Alan raised his hand and said that they had no evidence. First, the deputy should bring him a pen and a piece of paper. Harmon asked if it was so sudden, what did he need them for? The protagonist looked to the side with a serious look and asked, "Isn't it obvious? They will track the vampire." At the same time, the Duke quickly ran down the corridor, running into the room. He covered his mouth with his hand and stood near the door in the room. Fomer quickly spat blood out of his mouth onto the floor. He clasped his bloody mouth with his hand and said that it was a curse. The Fomorian, looking terrifying, quickly opened his mouth, spewing out bright lights, and said loudly that this was it, that freak. The Duke thought that the protagonist had clearly understood who he really was. No one would have just offered him sacred water, saying that it was alcohol. The Fomorian, looking terrifying, covered his bleeding mouth with his hand and thought that he needed to cut out all his burned organs. He coughed up blood from his mouth and thought that he needed new blood and fresh meat right now. Milia turned to the Duke and said that she was here to clean his room. The Fomorian, smiling, told her to come in. The maid, smiling, looked into the room and asked him to forgive her. The Duke said that she did not need to apologize and that she could just clean as she pleased. Milia, holding a stick in her hand, looked at the pool of blood on the floor. The Fomorian said that he needed someone like her. After some time, the maids looked in surprise at the open door to the Duke's room and greeted him. Fomer smiled and adjusted his jacket, and said that it was a very good dinner. He looked in their direction and said that they must be so busy because of the banquet. The maid, smiling, put her hands on her dress and said that the Duke was the only one who was worried about them. Fomer said that, by the way, about the maid, whose name was Milia, she worked so well that he was thinking of hiring her to his estate. The Duke asked the maids to convey his request to the chamberlain. The maids said loudly that working for someone like the Duke was very good, and they were sure that Milia would be very happy. Fomerus, walking away, laughed and said that there was nothing special in their estate and that he would go then. The maid, looking at him, said that the banquet hall was on the other side. The Duke, stopping, said that he was not going to the banquet hall. Fomerus, smiling ominously, said that he was going to visit the first prince to give him an evening greeting. After a while, the protagonist, holding a piece of paper in his hand, said that he had written everything. Harmon asked, "Is it really that many?" Alan thoughtfully looked at the piece of paper and said that these were only the ones he saw on the first floor. Charlotte said that there were a lot of aristocrats here. The deputy looked at him and said that since there was no way to prove that they were vampires, the protagonist was in trouble. Still, none of them were parents, so things weren't that bad. Alan looked away in surprise and asked, "What do parents mean?" Harmon calmly said that as the protagonist knows from the process of evolution of the dead, after evolution, if someone was born a vampire, they are called parents. For example, like the vampire duke who was defeated last time. After so many circumstances, the parents created the creatures. Their specialty is hiding among people. Alan, holding a pen in his hand, looked away and asked, "Can they really hide even from sacred powers?" The deputy looked down with a tense expression and said that, to be honest, they can. These freaks can change bodies with those they killed. The protagonist looked away in amazement and asked what that meant. Harmon meant the bodies were missing and the heads were left behind. The deputy sadly agreed with him and said that the vampire must have taken the body and they only saw what was left of it. Since it was a human body, the sacred power must have been stronger than them. Alan instantly squeezed a piece of paper in his hand. He turned to the side and addressed Harmon and asked, "He has a pretty high position in society, right?" The deputy looked at him with a puzzled expression and said that his role was high enough that he could move one group of knights on his command. The protagonist calmly looked forward and said that then Harmon should catch those on the list. First, he should figure out the situation and then kill them if necessary. The deputy looked at the list tensely. Alan turned to Charlotte and said that he would take full responsibility, so she should help the deputy. The deputy turned to His Highness and asked, "Will everything be fine with him?" Harmon thoughtfully looked at the protagonist, said that managing a military force during a banquet would look like. Alan, without letting him finish, asked why the deputy was worried only about him. He needed to worry about himself. Since there was no way to prove that they were vampires, they would kill them first and watch them turn to ashes. The Duke had probably already noticed that the protagonist had revealed his identity. If he didn't hurry, he would be in danger. They looked at each other with confidence. The deputy closed his eyes and agreed with him. Charlotte asked His Highness to be careful. Alan, looking at his subordinates leaving, thought that now he just needed to hide. He was surprised to hear someone call out to him. Raphael Elfos, the third prince of 21, said loudly that they had not seen each other for a long time. He smiled, held out his glass and loudly called the protagonist his younger brother. The system window notifies that these are Raphael's characteristics. He is cunning, very good at using a spear, thanks to his physique, trusting and afraid of many things. He will definitely become the next emperor for his mana. Alan wondered what's with these very bad characteristics. Raphael smiled and put his hand on his chest and asked, "Did he hear that the protagonist lost his memory? This is very sad for him." He said with a sly grin that he is his esteemed one. Alan interrupted him and said that he is the third prince. The protagonist raised his hands with a smile on his face and thought that Harmon told him about the third prince. Raphael loves his mother very much, even the Holy Emperor recognized him as such. A prince with almost zero presence of divinity. Raphael yawned and brought his fist to his mouth, and said that it seemed like the protagonist had not forgotten him. Alan did not confirm his words and said that the deputy told him about him. Raphael smiled and said that let it be as he said. None of the other brothers attended today's banquet? The protagonist shouldn't be upset, they must have more important things to do. Since they even forgot to come to Alan's Thanksgiving banquet. The protagonist smirked and thought that the others needed to see the prince. Was he trying to anger the protagonist? Alan turned to his brother and said that he would be enough. Raphael arrogantly placed his hand on his hip and said that he was able to come here because his schedule was free today. The third prince placed his hand on his shoulder and said that he saw that the protagonist still didn't like cleaning up everything. Raphael was very glad that Alan didn't lose his reckless thoughts. The third prince smiled ominously and said that if the protagonist came to their castle to demand the place of the next prince, then they could become enemies. Alan looked at the hand on his shoulder in annoyance. Raphael told him to just continue living as he had been living before. The third prince turned to the side, raised his hand and said that he would be leaving. The protagonist looked away tensely and thought that even if he weren't here, Raphael still wouldn't be able to become the next prince. He should forget about this fool and focus on work. Alan walked away and thought that since he didn't know how strong the Foma was, he needed to conserve his energy. He would hide until Harmon and Charlotte did their job. The protagonist instantly stopped when he heard his name being called loudly. Juan called his name loudly and told Alan to come out quickly. The protagonist angrily put his hand on his face and thought that it was good that someone actually shouted his name throughout the hall. How did this guy ruin everything for the others that they were looking for him like this? Someone loudly called out to Prince Luan and asked him to stop because he couldn't move too much. Alan quickly turned to the side. Someone loudly said that something really bad could happen at this rate. The protagonist looked in amazement towards the prince standing in the hall. The system window informs that his characteristics are a tendency towards generosity and vice. He has a rotting body, a talent for wielding a sword, and the first prince has the qualifications to be a wise ruler. He has the qualifications to become a tyrant. Luan wants to punish the person who did this to his mother. Alan looked at him and thought that this rotten smell and magical power are amazing. Luan is still alive, even living in a body that looks like a dead person. His willpower is worthy of respect. The first prince quickly grabbed him by the shirt without giving him time to think. Luan looked at the protagonist angrily and loudly asked, how dare he insult his subordinate? The count is a person who served their mother, and the prince does not think that Alan did not know about it. Why does he constantly insult God and do everything against him? The first prince, with a furious look, coughing up blood from his mouth, loudly asked, why does Alan continue to denigrate the honor of their mother? The Celt walked forward and asked what they were doing under the divine protection of the Holy Empire. The assistant said loudly that the ruler of the Holy Empire, His Majesty, is here. The Celt looked forward and asked why no one was answering him. He quickly sent a stream of light energy forward and asked loudly what they were doing. Alan gritted his teeth and raised his hand from the powerful stream of energy, and thought that even his voice contained such a large amount of sacred power. The Celt looked angrily at Luan, coughing up blood from his mouth, and loudly addressed him by status. The Emperor looked to the side with a serious expression and ordered the Archbishop and other doctors to take the first prince away and give him help. Raphael tensely agreed with His Majesty. The Celt looked forward and asked the seventh prince to explain himself. He heard that the protagonist insulted the Duke of Fomer. Is that really true? Alan looked to the side with a serious expression and said that it was true. The Emperor asked what was the reason for this. The protagonist looked ahead in confusion and thought that he couldn't say that he was hunting him and not trying to insult him. Maybe he should just try saying that the Fomorian was a vampire? The Celt would definitely not believe him. The protagonist said that he had drunk too much, so he was wrong. The Emperor asked sternly, was he really wrong? Was he really telling the truth? Alan looked at him irritably and wondered what kind of reaction this was. He felt like the Celt was expecting a different answer, just like last time. The Emperor looked down at the protagonist with a tense expression. Alan turned to His Majesty and said that there were no other reasons. Luan, leaning his hand on the table, rose from the floor and told them to leave. He quickly grabbed the glass with his hand and threw it with great force onto the floor, breaking it into many pieces. The Celt turned his head to the side and loudly called out to the first prince. Luan put his hand on the wound and asked to forgive him for his rudeness, and said that Alan had insulted his man. He looked away with a calm expression and said that it was not something he could ignore. Luan wanted to ask permission to duel him. The Celt asked angrily, how could the first prince say such things with his body? The Emperor walked away and said that he would give the protagonist a punishment after sorting out the whole situation, and that the first prince had to go now. Luan looked forward and disagreed with His Majesty. He said that he heard that the Celt generously thanked Alan for the incident at the Lonius estate. If the Emperor allowed the protagonist to fight him, didn't he think that he would be able to see his true nature? Is he capable of hunting vampires, or did he just take someone else's glory? Luan looked at the Emperor with a calm expression and asked, wasn't he also interested? Raphael smiled tensely and turned to His Majesty, and said loudly that he needed to stop the first prince. He looked at the Emperor, who turned to the side and loudly addressed His Majesty and asked where he was going. They needed to be stopped immediately. Luan, with a bloody body, turned to his younger brother and said that the Holy Emperor approved of their battle. He quickly pointed his finger at the protagonist and said that he would rid him of his arrogance. The first prince confidently said that Alan had better prepare. The protagonist looked forward with an arrogant look and thought that they didn't even ask his opinion about all this. The people standing on the balcony looked down and quietly said that the seventh prince was up to his old tricks again. They had better leave here quickly. The man, walking away, told him to follow him. Grill angrily said loudly that their seventh prince might be a complete freak, but he was still a good person. Janet quickly, not letting him finish, covered his mouth with his hand and loudly told him to calm down. He smiled and apologized to Lady Alice and said that his friend didn't tolerate alcohol well. Alice ignored him and looked down, putting her hands on the railing. She looked ahead and said that she thought the seventh prince had given Harmond a note. Maybe they knew what was written in it. Janet looked at her in surprise and said that he had not seen it. Could it really be something important? Alice looked at them smiling, clenching her hand into a fist, and said that she was just a little curious. She wondered why the seventh prince had poured the Duke of Foam a drink. As if he was waiting for something to happen. Alice looked tensely to the side, raised her hand and thought that now was not the time to think about that. She needed to focus on the first prince, because he could not overexert himself. She looked at them confidently, clenched her dress in her hand, lifting it up and said loudly that she would go down first. She determinedly walked down quickly and thought, what if something bad happened to the first prince? Their duel should end without losses. Alan held the stick in his hands and thought, why is he in the body of a person who has such a terrible relationship with his relatives? He looked at the first prince with confusion and wondered, are they really allowing a dying man to fight a duel? After all, he looks like he is about to die. The protagonist calmly turned his head to the side. He thought that he did not know what they expected from the duel, but it seemed that the Holy Emperor was not going to stop it. The Archbishop was only worried about the first prince and would not side with Alan. Raphael looked down sadly and said that for safety reasons, it was forbidden to use sacred powers. Not only because the first prince's body would not be able to withstand sacred powers. If it was true that the seventh prince was hunting the vampire parent, then the protagonist did not rely only on sacred powers to fight him. You could say that this was an opportunity to test his martial arts skills. Alan looked to the side in confusion and thought, so that he would not be so bad. The protagonist only used his sacred powers. He doesn't even know how to use a sword. The two who are supposed to protect Alan aren't here at all. He instantly clenched the stick in his hand and thought there was only one way out. Luan looked at him in surprise and asked what happened. Did the protagonist finally decide to get serious? The first prince smiled and raised his stick and addressed His Majesty, asking him to perceive this duel as a neutral incident. They confidently pointed their sticks forward with the intention of attacking. The Celt closed his eyes and said that they should not forget to respect each other, they are brothers. The Emperor quickly raised his hand up and lowered it, and said that the duel was beginning. Alan ran towards his brother at great speed. He instantly bent down in front of the attacking Luan. The protagonist resolutely looked forward and raised his hand back, clutching the stick in it. The first prince sternly looked forward, throwing the stick back. Alan quickly put his hand on his stick. He instantly knelt down and raised the stick in front of him and loudly said that he surrendered. People watched what is happening with blank expressions. The protagonist, kneeling, threw a stick on the floor and said his name. He closed his eyes, folded his hands in front of his face, and said loudly that he surrendered to Luan because he was very afraid of him. People watched what is happening with blank expressions on their faces. The Emperor angrily hit his face with his hand and wondered if Alan did it because he didn't want to fight? Or because he was worried about Luan's condition? It doesn't matter what the reason was. The Celt called the protagonist a fool. Alan said that they asked them to respect each other, because they are brothers. Luan angrily clenched his teeth and, shaking, turned to the seventh prince. He quickly hit the floor with a stick, breaking it into pieces, and loudly called Alan a freak. The protagonist, looking frightened, instantly removed his hand from the place of the attack and looked away. He looked at the first prince in surprise and addressed him by his status. Luan lowered his head and sighed heavily. Not only did he insult his man, but now Alan dared to insult him, that he looked like a walking dead. The first prince looked away with rage and loudly asked, were all the protagonist's insults really aimed at him? He quickly hit the floor with a stick and loudly called Alan a freak and trash. The protagonist looked forward in fear, turned to the side and loudly addressed his brother, and told him to have common sense. The first prince angrily quickly raised his weapon up, enveloping it with energy, and loudly said that he did not care about common sense. He could not forgive him for what the protagonist did. Alan looked tensely towards the energy, leaning his hand on the floor, and thought that Luan was using his sacred powers. If the protagonist did not block the attack, his body would explode. He gritted his teeth and thought, would grandfather not stop them anyway? Alan instantly concentrated the energy into the weapon. The people looked at the changed weapon in amazement. They asked loudly, where did this shovel come from? The man looked ahead in surprise and said that he didn't know that the seventh prince could use spatial magic. The masked guy said that it wasn't magic, because he didn't feel the flow of mana. It was definitely a divine aura. The protagonist quickly blocked his brother's blows with his shovel. He tensely covered himself from the attacks and wondered how Luan was even still standing with such a body. The first prince would be in danger if they continued. Alan quickly looked at the Fomer standing in the crowd of people with an amazed look. The Duke grinned and looked ahead through the crowd of people. The protagonist looked ahead in fear, holding a shovel in his hands. He wondered, was this really this freak's plan? Alan couldn't leave him unpunished. Everything would be decided if this guy was killed. The protagonist quickly put away his weapon and turned to his brother and said that he was sorry. Lon looked at the bright light in surprise. Alan confidently clenched his teeth and pointed the energy-shrouded shovel forward, loudly telling his brother to accept it. He hit Juan's body with a shovel at high speed, throwing it back and raising streams of smoke. The protagonist, stressed, quickly looking away, loudly promised his brother that he would take revenge on his enemies. The first prince, with blood flying out of his mouth, falls down. Alan raised his hand back, concentrated energy in it, and loudly addressed His Highness. He quickly created a weapon, extended his hand to it, and said that it looked like there were many of them in the castle. People watching the situation loudly said that another weapon suddenly appeared in the seventh prince's hand. Could it be that it was also from his divine aura? The protagonist confidently raised the rifle, pulling the trigger. Raphael, smiling, loudly addressed His Majesty and said that he should stop them. Even if the weapon is not capable of killing the enemy, shooting at such a distance is still dangerous. Alan directed the energy from the weapon towards Luan and said that it was on behalf of Gaia. He thought that the Archbishop should not worry. The protagonist fired a beam of powerful energy from his weapon, cutting through the air. The Foma looked at the beam rushing towards him in fear. A powerful stream of energy hit the Duke in the head, giving off a stream of air. The man looked in amazement at the Foma falling from the attack. Alan angrily pressed his lips together, and thought that because he could only pray for a short time, the power of the shot was too small. He needed to shoot again. Luan, lying on the floor, screamed loudly and said that the seventh prince had gone crazy. The emperor ordered the knights to stop the seventh prince. The knight, looking at him, loudly agreed with His Majesty. The protagonist looked at the knights walking towards him in surprise. Alan, looking away with anger, said loudly that he had not finished yet. He thought that he only needed to shoot once. The protagonist would definitely be able to kill him if he shot again. Luan, looking down sadly, sighed heavily, remembering what was happening. The Celt, approaching the first prince, said that this was something new. He looked sternly at Luan and said that he was sure that he was thinking the same thing. The first prince, looking tiredly to the side, agreed with His Majesty and said that he suddenly remembered what Harmon said that day. He said that Alan was deliberately acting like a freak. The protagonist deliberately made them kick him out of the castle to get revenge on his mother. After seeing his abilities, Juan can believe his words. Therefore, the first prince wants to convince that Alan really has the necessary qualities of a holy emperor. The first prince put his fist on his forehead and loudly addressed His Highness and said that as the emperor can see, he will soon die. Luan, holding out his hand with blood on his palm, said that he wants to do whatever it takes to free himself from the curse and become the next emperor. The first prince has already reached his limit and therefore, if he wants to get revenge on the nobles who laughed at their mother, calling her a person of low status, he needs to make Alan the next holy emperor. Luan clenched his teeth in rage and clenched his fist. He said that this freak really wanted to kill the Duke of Fomer. If the protagonist really wanted to ridicule the first prince, then he would have been his target. For some reason, Alan is simply obsessed with the Duke, although Luan does not know the reason. Raphael, looking at the emperor with a serious expression, said loudly that the first prince urgently needs help. The Celt, looking to the side, agreed with him and said that they would discuss the rest later. Does she know where Harmond is? Alice looked to the side in surprise and said that he left the banquet hall during the duel and never returned. The emperor looked sternly to the side, putting his hand on his beard. He looked at the archbishop and asked what about the Count of Fomer. Raphael, looking seriously, said that the duke was taken to the chambers for assistance. The Celt ordered that Fomer be told to come to him. The archbishop, looking to the side with an incomprehensible expression, asked for forgiveness. He asked what the emperor would do with the wounded man. The Celt asked, "Isn't he seriously injured because of his grandson? The emperor just wants to give him good care himself." The Celt looked sternly to the side, clenched the palm of his hand and asked, should he clear the Fomer's mind with sacred power? Perhaps it was too early to open his skull yet. Raphael said that he was not sure what the consequences would be after that. After a while, the protagonist angrily looked forward, clenched the bars in his hands and said loudly that he was imprisoned again. Alan gritted his teeth and thought that he only injured him, but he found himself in such a bad situation. What if the Duke is now walking around the castle and killing the servants again? Besides, the castle has become somehow too quiet. Did Harmond and Charlotte fail to complete the task? Seeing the Earl confidently walking around the banquet hall, the protagonist thinks that he still has secret powers. For them, being in the sacred castle is like being in the enemy's house. They probably have a manual that tells them how to get out of any bad situation. Even if that's not the case, it will be problematic for a deputy with his position to hurt aristocrats. Vampires pretending to be aristocrats will use their high status to surround themselves with personal knights, thereby delaying their capture. Using this opportunity, at the end of the banquet, the vampires will mix with the human aristocrats and escape. Alan will be convicted of attempting to kill the Duke. The protagonist angrily raised his legs, clutching the bars with his hands, and thought that this should not be. Raphael asked, "Is he really causing trouble here too?" Alan turned to the side and asked, "Is this really the third prince?" Raphael asked angrily, looking at him. The protagonist should call him older brother. Does he remember this? He smiled maliciously and raised his fist to his mouth, said that he saw his duel. Brothers should not fight. Alan said calmly that despite his own words, the third prince seemed satisfied. Raphael said that he was just in that mood. Alan looked away calmly and thought that it was probably because he got rid of one pretender to the throne. The third prince was very happy about this. After all, this freak was also a prince? That means he has the right to let the protagonist out of here. Alan turned to his older brother and asked if he could help him get out of here. Raphael asked why he would do that. If the Holy Emperor reprimanded the third prince for letting him out of here. The protagonist asked with a smile, "Isn't the first prince in critical condition now? If Raphael has a debt, it would be better to pay it back right away." That's why Alan wanted to visit the first prince. The third prince knows what he's like, right? Raphael covered one eye and put his hands on his hips. The protagonist smiled ominously and approached the bars and said that if the third prince lets him out, he will see something very interesting a little later. After some time, Alan asked, "Does the third prince dislike the first prince so much?" Raphael not only helped him get out of prison, but also brought him to the weapons warehouse. The protagonist remembered the past. The third prince, smiling, pointed to the side and said loudly that Alan should visit the first prince, and he should not forget to take his gift. The protagonist asked, "Really, from there?" Alan, coming out of his memories, asked once that he was freed from prison, but what should he do now? In the Imperial Palace, he does not have anyone who could help him. The protagonist thinks that the vampires have already finished sharing information with each other. He put his hand on his side with an irritated look and asked, "So it's time to use a little power?" A person with more power than Alan. He can use it, and the protagonist is afraid that he will have to turn to someone everyone trusts. Alan, enveloping himself in streams of energy, pointed his hand forward and said that he needs to clear the way with something. The system window notifies that the skill is activated. The protagonist said that it looks like they will have to help him with the arrival. The system window notifies that these are the spirits of dead soldiers. Alan, looking at the undead, said that he thinks that they should cover their faces with armor. After some time, the undead smiled and raised his hand, showing the armor on his body. The protagonist said that at first he wanted to quietly sort everything out, but those vampires continue to touch him. The first prince still does not understand what Alan was trying to convey to him. The protagonist, smiling, raised his finger and said that first they will go to the first prince. The maids, covering their mouths and hands, loudly asked them to stop and asked what was wrong with those soldiers. The seventh prince had started a rebellion. Alan quickly ran towards the knights. He angrily pointed his hand forward and loudly ordered the knights not to kill anyone, but simply to clear the way for him. They must bring more soldiers here. Someone said loudly that the protagonist was heading to the first prince's room. The knights decisively attacked the opponents, clearing the way to the room. Alan looked back smiling as he walked to the side and said loudly that this was very good. The knight said loudly that the protagonist was heading to the first prince's room and needed to be stopped. People quickly looked at the protagonist who had entered the room and asked loudly, "Was this really the seventh prince?" The masked man with the knight restraining his movements behind his back loudly told Alan to stop, because they had not finished treating the first prince. The protagonist smiled, extended his hand to the side and loudly ordered to close the door and make sure that no one came in. The masked man raised his hands and loudly asked His Highness not to do this. The doors to the room were quickly closed. Alan stopped in front of the door without saying anything. Luan sighed heavily, looked away and asked, "What is he doing?" The protagonist looked at him and said that he did not want to do this. The first prince should have let him go before. Because of Luan, the vampire hunt failed. The first prince asked with a peaceful look, was he really talking about the Duke of Fomer? Alan asked in surprise, did he really know about this? Luan didn't confirm it, and said that from the look of him, something was really going on. The protagonist was wrong about that, because the priests confirmed it. Alan asked if the first prince was sure that they had checked everything well. Those vampires had human skin and were hard to tell apart from humans unless their heads were filled with sacred power. Doesn't one think that it would be hard for ordinary priests to tell apart those vampires from humans? Alan looked sternly at his brother, and said that as long as they were sitting here, this castle was simply filled with vampires. Luan asked why the protagonist didn't tell him that he was a vampire. Alan asked if the first prince would believe him if he did. Luan clutched the blanket with his hand and said that if the protagonist showed them his true self and if he told the truth, they would believe him. Alan looked away with a puzzled expression and asked what he meant by telling the truth. If the first prince wanted the truth, then he no longer wanted to be associated with this family or the vampires. Apparently, he couldn't escape from this nightmare. The main character put on a mask, enveloped his body in energy, and quickly raised the shovel above Luan's body, asking his brother to first repay him for his labors with his life. The first prince looked fearfully at the beam rushing towards him, leaning his hand on the bed. At the same time, Raphael, quickly running down the corridor, loudly asked, "What is going on here?" The knight raised his fist forward and loudly said that the seventh prince and his soldiers had captured the first prince's room. The archbishop asked loudly with a serious look, had he left his post for just a minute, and they allowed him to come in? Raphael, looking at the crowded knights, called them fools. The archbishop quickly struck the knights and loudly asked, how could they be worse than this old man? He looked in surprise at the fallen body of the undead. Raphael, looking at the zombie, wondered, is this really a dead man? Did the seventh prince control the dead? Was some necromancer able to deceive them? The same pure sacred energy emanates from them, just like from other sacred knights. Creatures that contradict the laws of this world. It is absolutely impossible to create something like this even with magic. What did this seventh prince do? Raphael raised his staff to the side and loudly ordered the knights to capture this hall. They must make sure that none of the soldiers leave it. The archbishop thought that he must first save the first prince before that. Raphael instantly struck the knights with his fist, leaving a stream of energy behind his attack. The knights fell to the floor, making loud sounds of pain. The archbishop thought that he needed to find the person who summoned them. The undead, enveloped in energy, quickly fell to the floor from the powerful light coming from behind the door. Raphael looked away in surprise and loudly asked, "What is happening? The soldiers are falling, and what does all this mean?" He quickly ran towards the slightly open door. The archbishop looked forward in fear. He looks at Alan, who is hitting the first prince's body with a shovel. The protagonist thrust the shovel into the bloody body, and said that it could be said that Luan had paid him with his death. Alan confidently looked down while clutching the handle of the weapon and loudly ordered the first prince to resurrect. The first prince thought that the protagonist had many strange qualities. Duke Fomer reported only about Alan's bad behavior near his bed. He said that the protagonist told everyone about Luan's low status, and that he insulted their mother. The first prince should have realized that Fomer was telling him such things on purpose. When he immediately came to report what happened in the banquet hall. The reason why Luan didn't suspect him is because he had been with him since he was young. Fomer was the only one who supported the first prince after the loss of his mother. Luan didn't realize that the duke was actually a vampire. He was such a fool. So the first prince could understand why Alan wanted to kill him. The first prince clenched his hands, throwing his head back and coughing up blood from his mouth. His spirit quickly flew out of his body. The spirit embraced the protagonist, illuminating his body. Alan gritted his teeth with the mask falling from his face and clenched his hands, enveloping the weapon in sacred energy. The protagonist, pointing his weapon down, said that he was a legion and the heir of Gaia. The soul quickly combined with the directed energy. Luan, with his chest illuminated by the soul's impact, quickly rose and screamed loudly. He instantly rose and crossed his bloody hands. Raphael, entering the room, looked forward. The first prince, holding a bandage in his hand, thought that his body no longer hurt, and now it was easier for him to breathe. The protagonist, smiling, raised his hand, looking at him. He asked how Luan was his new life. The first prince, looking at his hand, freeing it from the bandages, said that his skin had returned to him. He quickly squeezed the bandages, removing them from his face, and said that his muscles and bones were in order. The curse that had tormented him all these years had disappeared. Luan, with his body naked and illuminated by a bright light, stood up and raised his hands up loudly, said that it was amazing. Alan, illuminated by a bright light, closed his eyes and raised his hand. After some time, the protagonist said that he used a lot of power to resurrect him. He would give Luan a detailed explanation later. Therefore, the first prince must find Harmon for him. Alan, sitting on the bed, said that he wants Luan to finish what he started. In fact, it will definitely not be difficult for the first prince to do this. Luan, looking at him, asked, "What is this?" After some time, the first prince, smiling, thought that he will do everything that his brother tried to do, without any mistakes and as quickly as he can. The knight raised his hand, said that they cannot let him go, because the Marquis was very angry. Harmon, sternly looking down, said that he said so. Luan quickly stood up next to the knight, put his hand on the deputy's shoulder, and said that this guy only listens to his commands. Harmon looked at him in surprise and asked who he was. He asked loudly in amazement, "Is he really the first prince?" Luan looked away with a confident grin. The deputy asked loudly with a puzzled look, "Is it really that the curse was lifted?" The first prince raised his hand and said that he would tell him everything in detail later. "Can Harmon show him the list?" The deputy looked at him with fear and said that if he was talking about that list. Luan interrupted him and said that Alan personally asked him for help, so there was no need to worry. The amazing thing that happened to his body was proof of that. Harmon looked at Charlotte without saying anything. He held a piece of paper in his hand and said that here was a list of vampires. Luan looked at the list in surprise and asked loudly, "Is there really that many?" The deputy agreed with His Highness and said that there were even aristocrats from other countries. His abilities were only enough for this. All Harmon could do was hold them back. The deputy sadly lowered his head and asked His Highness for forgiveness. The first prince put his hand on his shoulder and said that there was no need to say that, he did well. Thanks to Harmon, the hunt had become much easier. He had not used his powers for a long time. Charlotte looked forward in fear. The Inquisitor of Heresy and the Law of the Bloody Cross said that they followed the commands of the first prince, and they were summoned. Harmon looked down seriously and thought that these soldiers were trained to kill the undead and only the first prince could summon them. They obeyed only his commands and they were one of the 5 strongest groups of the Sacred Kingdom. Luan raised the list in front of his head and thanked them for gathering and asked, had they not gone hunting for a long time? The first prince showed the list and said that here was a list with the names of the freaks hiding in the Sacred Kingdom. They even killed his mother. Luan asked them to open the bodies, rip out the hearts and open their skulls, checking if their brains were covered with magic. The first prince smiled and said that it should be merciless and with special cruelty. They must make them realize how bad their fake life is. Luan calmly squeezed the list in his hand and said that this is a vampire hunt. After a while, a bright beam of energy opened the door, quickly throwing the knight aside. The man looked at the body in surprise and asked loudly, "Who dared to attack their family knight? Do they really think that after this they can just?" A beam of powerful energy quickly cut the man's head without letting him finish. The man of the Bloody Cross caught the head on his hand. He looked at the bright flame enveloping the head and said that there is a small residue of magic under his skin. The man from the Bloody Cross clenched his hand into a fist and said that it is confirmed that the people mentioned in this list are vampires. He ordered his assistants to kill everyone. The girl, looking at the fight in fear, raised her hand and screamed loudly in fear. She loudly asked them to stop. The man from the Bloody Cross looked at the face of the man he had captured. The vampires, running to the sides, loudly asked, how could they even understand? Luan put his hands behind his back and watching what was happening in the room loudly ordered to catch all the freaks who escaped from the palace. Harmon looked away in surprise and thought that they didn't care about anything except catching and killing the people on the list. They were really hunting now. The deputy clenched his hand into a fist and turned to His Highness and said that they couldn't find the Duke of Fomer anywhere. They had to find him and catch him now. The first prince confidently looked in his direction and said that there was no need to worry about him. He smiled and said that Fomer was called to a place more dangerous than here. Luan was sure that by this point, everyone knew about his oddities. At the same time, the emperor asked why the duke wasn't answering. He sat on the throne with an ominous look and ordered him to answer. The Celt raised his hand and asked if Fomer was really a vampire. The duke folded his hands in fear and wondered what was going on. When he heard that the Holy Emperor would treat him personally, because of his grandson's disrespectful attitude, Fomer was about to politely refuse him. The Celt raised his hand with a terrifying look and asked, was he asking too bluntly? He apologized for not showing enough respect. The emperor said that if the duke was an ordinary man, he would ask for his forgiveness later. The Celt looked forward sternly and said that if Fulmer was a vampire, he would not be able to let him go. The Duke turned to His Majesty and asked, did he doubt God? His human nature was confirmed. The Emperor said that he did this because he did not trust the priests. The Celt hoped that Fulmer would help him so that he could trust him. The Duke looked up and turned to His Majesty and thought that he could hear the sounds of death from all directions. They were chasing and hunting those who even left the palace. This should have ended peacefully after Fulmer put the 7th prince behind bars, but why now? How could vampires become victims of hunting? Fulmer looked away with fear and thought that he needed to get out of here as soon as possible, but being detained by the Emperor would be difficult. The Celt looked forward seriously and asked the Duke to look at him. The Emperor extended his finger and asked how someone younger than him could have hearing problems. Fulmer thought, if he looked around there were no weapons or holy knights anywhere. The Duke knew that the Emperor was the hero who killed the king of necromancers, Amon. Right now, he was just an old man who was not afraid of death. Unlike them, who had immortality, the Celt was just a living creature with limited time. Perhaps for Fulmer, who had almost reached the level of his parent, it would be easy. The Duke laughed with a smirk on his face. The Emperor looked at him and asked why he was laughing. Did he really say something funny? Fulmer bent forward and laughed loudly. He loudly insulted the Holy Emperor and said that he was just an old man. The Celt said calmly that hearing how rudely he addressed him. The Fulmer asked if the Emperor was asking if he was a vampire. The Duke said loudly that he was a vampire. The Fulmer quickly bit the skin, spraying blood to the sides. The Celt quickly looked at the bleeding Duke. The Fulmer smiled with a torn-off hand and said that he did not have to speak politely to a fool like him. The Duke with a rapidly growing hand said loudly that he was a predator devouring the same people as the Emperor. He would eat his body, a relic of the past, and receive the recognition of other vampires of the parents. A huge arm appendage quickly moved towards the Emperor. A piece of fabric with great force hit the place where the Celt stood. The Fulmer quickly raised his hand and loudly said that as expected, now the Emperor was powerless. The hand clenched its palm into a fist, spraying blood to the sides. The Duke looked forward in fear, squeezing the fabric of the huge hand with his hands. The Emperor with a terrifying aura in his eyes looked forward, getting out of the grip. The Fulmer looked at him and asked, what is this? The Celt instantly tore the tissues of his hand and clenched the palm of his hand into a fist, pointing it upward with the intention of attacking. He struck forward with great force, directing a powerful beam of energy and cutting through the air. The Emperor asked, Fulmer is not even a vampire parent, so what made him believe in himself so much? The Celt, standing on the ground, asked, he killed Amon, the king of necromancers. Does the Duke really think that he cannot cope with one simple vampire? The Fulmer looked away with a frightened look and a bloody face. The Emperor raised his fist forward with a smile and introduced himself. He slapped his hand against the Duke's face with great force. The Fulmer loudly asked him to wait. Blood splashed from the Duke's body in different directions. The Emperor looked at the Fulmer's head in his hands and asked, does it seem that he is stronger than the others? The Celt asked him not to die and said that because he must find out what happened in the incident with Elisha. The Duke can see, it would be worse than death. The Emperor looked at the head of the Fulmer with an ominous look, holding it forward. After some time, Darina Rose, 45 years old, the next princess, said that it was very loud in the castle. She, tearing off a rose leaf, said that the 7th prince had escaped from prison, and suddenly a vampire hunt had begun. Raphael looked down in disappointment. Darina asked if it was really he who had let him out. The 3rd prince, looking sad, said that he was not going to help him. The vase quickly hit his head, splashing water to the sides. Darina, putting her hands on the table, said loudly that she had told him to sit and do nothing. She said loudly with a terrifying look that she had told the 1st prince not to swear at the Emperor. Darina quickly grabbed him by the clothes and said loudly that he had ruined everything. It was all because of this freak. She stopped with a puzzled look and, looking forward, said loudly that she was very sorry. Is Raphael hurt? Darina hugged him with tears in her eyes and said loudly that she loved her son Russell very much. Darina only tries to make Raphael the next emperor, and only then the next prince will look at her. The 3rd prince, opening his eyes slightly, sitting on the floor, said that he was not the one of low birth from Ulysses. Dariana turned to her beloved firstborn and asked, does he understand his mother? Raphael agreed with his mother. He said that he will definitely become the next emperor. 3 weeks later, the legal bureau of the Holy Empire, everything was finished. Half of the people mentioned in the list were killed on the day the hunt began. The remaining vampires were executed in the square. It was a relief for the people and a warning to the vampires hiding in the shadows. Some of the vampires were secretly included in the experimental materials that were constantly updated. The incident that happened in the capital of the Holy Empire became known, and talk about it spread throughout the continent. More importantly, the appearance of someone who could see vampires caused quite a stir throughout the country, and the seventh prince was in the spotlight. Raphael extended his hand and loudly ordered everyone to be quiet. He said loudly that from now on, they would begin a meeting regarding Alan. The protagonist looked forward with a puzzled expression. Alan raised his hand and asked for forgiveness, and asked what the essence of the interrogation was. The archbishop put his fist to his mouth and said that the seventh prince led his soldiers and destroyed part of the imperial palace. He violated the laws of the Holy Empire. The protagonist smiled and wondered if maybe he should just lock him up and leave him in the same cage with those vampires. The emperor said that it wasn't even funny. He turned to Raphael and said that he didn't understand a word of what the archbishop said. The Celt looked down sternly, resting his face on his hand, and asked what specific laws of the Holy Empire the prince violated. Raphael looked away and said that Alan was leading the knights without permission. Therefore, he will be convicted of rebellion. One interrupted him and said that in case of an emergency, everyone who is related to the prince by blood has the right to lead their knights. The first prince smiled and said that therefore there is nothing wrong with what the protagonist did. Besides, Juan is a person who was directly related to this matter. And the Holy Emperor is fine, so what questions can there be? Alan thought with a tired look, will the family still protect their family? He has a feeling that they are trying to protect him. The first prince raised his hand, closing his eyes, and said that if there is a problem with this, he will simply call the inquisitors again to find out what his intentions are. The emperor raised his hand, sitting on the throne, agreeing with his grandson. He said that they will find out if Alan really decides to start a rebellion. Or will it be just Raphael's dislike for the protagonist? The Celt turned to the archbishop and asked if he was right. Raphael angrily pointed his staff forward and loudly asked them to stop. He said loudly that he knew they would talk like this. After this interrogation, the archbishop is sure that the emperor will give Alan credit for getting rid of the vampires. The Celt rewarded him because the protagonist successfully cured the first prince. They covered their mouths with their hands while shaking, holding back their laughter. Raphael asked loudly with anger, how dare they mock the archbishop like this? Alan looked away with a smile and thought that it was true, there would be an award ceremony after this. The archbishop somehow managed to endure this imperial family? It was surprising that he gathered them all here so early. Raphael loudly agreed with them and said that they would simply move on to their next schedule. He closed his eyes and said that then, today's interrogation. The assistant, without letting him finish speaking, turned to the archbishop and asked, is something really wrong? Raphael looked at the protagonist and said that before finishing this interrogation, he would like to ask the seventh prince a question. Alan looked away in surprise and asked, is it really for him? The archbishop turned to his highness and asked, is it really for him to use necromancy? The protagonist looked away with a stern expression. Raphael asked, maybe Alan was somehow connected with necromancy? The protagonist thought that they finally asked. Why, of all people, did the archbishop know about the Walking Dead? Since his knowledge of magic is quite extensive, of course he would be interested in such creatures. Alan is sure that both the Sacred Emperor and the First Prince will also receive all the information. This time, the protagonist thinks that they will remain silent. He quickly raised his fist to his mouth. Alan, without confirming his words, said that this is impossible. Raphael raised his hand to the side and said that there is information. The protagonist asked in surprise, who is it? Did any of the priests present really see it with their own eyes? The archbishop loudly asked him to stop lying. He looked to the side with a serious expression and said that there were healers and holy knights. He had tied up those dead people on purpose so that they couldn't escape. Later, they found that the dead people had simply disappeared. They were following the seventh prince, Alan. Is the protagonist really going to continue lying when they have so much evidence? Alan raised his hand to the side and said that there were many vampires in the imperial castle that day. They could have used tricks to deceive them, the healers and holy knights. The archbishop squeezed his staff in his hand tightly and said loudly that it might have worked with those knights, but an archbishop like him couldn't be fooled. Alan looked at him and thought that it was true, but here they were talking about holy dead people. A priest who had never seen them in person wouldn't be able to believe it. So the protagonist can still lie to them. Right now, if only he could be friends with Raphael. The protagonist raised his hand without thinking and asked, is he really interested? He looked forward with a confident expression and asked, Can he tell him the truth? The Archbishop extended his hand towards him and asked, Is he really going to confess to what he did? Alan lowered his head and raised it and disagreed with him. After a while, black birds were flying across the bright sky. The protagonist walked through the arch and said that he was very cold. Charlotte turned to His Highness and said that he had done a very good job. She looked at him with interest, placing her hand on his body and asked, How is Alan's body? He had been in bed for the past 3 weeks. It must be hard for him to keep up with such a busy schedule like today. The protagonist smiled, adjusted his jacket, and said that he was fine, except for being a little sleepy. Alan looked down in surprise and thought that after he used the skull of Aman, he had to spend 3 weeks in bed. He didn't know that the punishment for reviving would be so severe. Although he assumed that it wouldn't be so easy for him. Harmon turned to His Highness. Alan looked at him and said that it was just in time. He had one thing to ask him. The deputy asked for forgiveness with a puzzled look. He walked towards the protagonist and turned to His Highness and asked what it was. Alan said that his shovel was broken into pieces. Since night would soon fall, Harmon should get him a new one. The deputy looked away in amazement and asked if Alan was really going to use shovels in the future too. Why didn't he learn the art of wielding a sword? The protagonist clutched his clothes in his hand with a puzzled look and asked why a priest needed a sword. Harmon asked, what was the point of a priest using a shovel? Alan said that his hand had gotten used to the shovel because all this time he had been doing nothing but digging. So there was nothing he could do about it. The deputy asked with a surprised face if that was the reason, why didn't the protagonist just make a new one? Alan asked with confusion, really a new weapon? Harmon raised his hand to the side and said that in the northwest there is a mine where metal and magic stones are presented. This is the territory of Hilda, the lands ruled by the first empress. This region is called the largest weapon empire. They signed a contract with the dwarves to create various things. If the protagonist goes there, he will be able to buy not only ordinary weapons, but also magical ones. Alan asked, does that mean he can make a musket too? The protagonist smiled, looked at Charlotte, and said that he thought it was a good idea. Why don't they go there when she has a day off? Harmon looked ahead and said that before that, in fact, he came here to ask Charlotte. She looked to the side in surprise and asked, really not the seventh prince? The deputy confirmed this and said that it was a little unexpected, but the sacred emperor was looking for her. Charlotte asked with a surprised look what he was talking about. After a while, the emperor asked if he really thought Raphael was telling the truth about the sacred dead. Luan put his hands behind his back and agreed with His Majesty, and said that Alan had done the impossible, he had resurrected him. The first prince looked at the hand in surprise and said that the other priests doubted the archbishop's words. Their reaction alone was enough to make the people at the scene fall silent. As for Luan, he believed him. The Celt bowed his head sternly, and said that they didn't know anything for sure right now. Was there really a violation of the law, or was the protagonist hiding something from them? The first prince asked then why didn't Alan tell him the truth. The emperor looked at his grandson and said that it was because he didn't trust him. After his expulsion, Juan insulted and pretended not to know him, even after the protagonist was threatened with death. Of course, he wouldn't believe him. The assistant turned to His Majesty and said that a letter had arrived from the first empress. The Celt asked him to come in. He raised his hand over the letter lying on the tray. The assistant said that since they had taken care of the insects, only the monsters remained. The emperor asked if he had sent the holy knights. The assistant said that it was true, he had sent the green cross to the territory of Hild. The Celt said that he believed that the enemy was not simple. Their territory was in the forest, so the green cross could not do anything. The vampire hunt had spread throughout the country, which angered the monsters. The emperor asked if he had any more letters. The assistant calmly said that Harmon was here with Mr. Grill and Lady Charlotte. The Celt looked away, folded the letter in his hands and said that it was he who had called them. He asked them to enter the room. They bowed and greeted His Majesty. The emperor said that he was glad to see them all. He had called them here because he wanted to reward them for defending the north. Grill looked ahead in confusion and asked, is it really a reward? The Celt looked at him and asked, is it Grill? The emperor heard that he always supported Alan, being nearby. The Celt extended his hand towards the bundle and said that that is why he wanted to reward them very well. The emperor opened the bundle and said that from now on, he gives Grill the title of the current owner of the House of Hires. Not only did he protect the territory of the north, but he is also the only aristocrat who supported his grandson. For this, the Celt rewards him with the title of Marquis. As for his daughter, Charlotte, The Emperor rewards her with the title of Knight. She will work under his good leadership in the Yellow Cross. The Celt rolled up the bundle and said that of course, if she wants a peaceful and quiet life, which Charlotte lived before, then he will not force her. It seems that she has already made her decision. Charlotte looked sternly to the side. The Emperor, looking at her, said that he will fully support her on his behalf. The Celt will appoint her the best teacher of the art of the sword. Charlotte gratefully thanked His Majesty. She confidently looked up, put her fist on her chest, and swore that she would support the 7th prince, and always be by his side. The Emperor said that he was touched by her loyalty. The Celt turned to Harmond and said that he was truly an amazing person. The Emperor had increased the subsidies of his territory, so the deputies should not be shy about using them. Harmond bowed and thanked His Majesty. The Emperor handed the bundle to Charlotte. He said that they would be blessed by Gaia and the Holy Empire. The doors to the room quickly closed. Harmond smiled, looked away and turned to Grill and said that he was glad that his loyalty this time did not go unrewarded. Grill raised his hands with a frightened look and said, "What was this?" He asked loudly in fear, "What was that just now?" What was the Emperor talking about? The deputy said that Hires was the name of his house. Grill showed him the document last time. Grill said loudly that he just picked up that document from the ground. Harmond asked in surprise, what was he talking about? Grill said loudly that he had said that he had simply picked him up while cleaning up the corpses in Lonia's territory because he looked expensive. The deputy asked what about the monsters he had hunted back then. Grill said loudly that it was simply not true. He put his hands on his head and said loudly that he could not believe that everything had turned out like this. Charlotte, with a drop of sweat on her face, said that if he meant hunting, then the 7th prince had done all of that. Grill threw his head back with tears in his eyes and said loudly that he was an ordinary person. How could he even become an aristocrat? This was all untrue. After a while, Celt said that Harmond had turned out to be a dreamer. He had mistaken an ordinary person for an aristocrat without even conducting a detailed investigation. That was why the deputy could not yet advance to the position of vice captain. One said with a smile that, to put it mildly, he was simply naive. Harmond was as pure as his thoughts. The Emperor said with a calm look that it was still nice to have such a confused person nearby. Now Celt wondered if Alan really had exiled himself on purpose. The first prince looked at him with a serious expression and asked if the Emperor really thought the protagonist had lost his memory. Celt said that at least it was true that Alan had not recognized him back in the garden. One said that he disagreed with His Majesty. It wasn't just from somewhere. The protagonist came from the land of the dead and hunted vampires there. It was impossible to find such a place by chance. There must be a reason why Alan chose these people. That's why they needed the Hires family, but there were no survivors among them. The first prince knew this better than anyone because he had fought against them together. Celt looked forward sternly and asked if he thought the child named Charlotte wasn't so bad. One asked with a calm expression if the Emperor was talking about that girl. Celt looked away with a calm expression and said that he had heard from Harmond that she had a good talent. He couldn't trust that girl, but the Emperor believed that she could become even stronger. If Charlotte increases her power under the name of Heras like Luan and Alan, the Emperor is confident that she will be able to make their empire strong. The power of this sacred empire must continue to grow. The first prince smiled and clenched his fists and said that he thought that Celt did not like commanders. The Emperor walked forward and ordered him to make sure that other nobles did not hear this. This child must be known by the Count's bloodline. Celt looked away with a serious expression and said that if we talk about the past, he knows that he did not realize the true value of Luan's mother. His mother is the only person who mourned the loss of the prince. The first prince looked at him and agreed with His Majesty. The Emperor looked out the window and said that it turned out that it was painful to talk about family like this. He should have watched his daughter-in-law more carefully. Aslan's movement in the south is now a common thing. An enemy flag can be seen on the horizon. One said in surprise that it would be problematic then if the Hilda territory did not agree to their demands. The Celt said that they needed a person who could fight demons and a strong sacred power. The first prince agreed with His Majesty and said that a person must be brave enough to face those monsters. They looked out the window. The houses were standing under the dawn and the bright rays of the bright sun. At the same time, the people said with a smile that it was all thanks to the sacred emperor that this village had come to life. Did she just belittle the 7th prince's work? The girl heard that he had changed, as if he had been reborn as another person and had become a priest. The villagers slammed their mugs together. The girl said that her friends from the Lonia estate had told her. They loudly exclaimed the goddess and said that the protagonist had saved the entire area. He really was a priest. The villagers said loudly that this was their priest. Luan looked at the emperor with enthusiasm. He held a piece of paper in his hand and asked to send this letter to Hilda. The first prince said that his beloved brother had not left the house for a long time. After some time, the protagonist thought that 3 weeks had passed since the vampire hunt. All this time he was unconscious. Now Alan is in the library, and not in his cozy bed, and the reason for this is that many people were looking for him. It seems that the Holy Emperor ordered everyone not to talk about anything. Somehow, the conversation still got to the people. In the village, everyone calls him a priest. The protagonist, putting his hand on the shelves of books, said that he wanted to go back to the monastery. Harmon turned to His Highness. Alan, frightened, turned to the side and said loudly that he had said that he would not answer any questions. The deputy, looking forward in surprise, said that it was him. Harmon accompanies the first prince. Luan, smiling, raised his hand and said that he asked the deputy to accompany him. Alan, covering his mouth with his fist, asked for forgiveness and said that he did not recognize. The first prince said that it seemed that the protagonist was very tired because of all these people. Harmon agreed with his words. Alan turned to his older brother and asked, "It seems that his last days were a success?" Surrounded by various young ladies. Luan laughingly said that it was all thanks to him. The first prince smilingly apologized and said that he knew that the protagonist found out. He came to tell Alan about an event that he needed to attend. The protagonist loudly asked if his brother couldn't refuse his name. Luan calmly said that he didn't know if his brother was joking or just pretending not to know about it. The anniversary of their mother's death was coming soon. Alan was obliged to attend the memorial service this year. The first prince put his hand in his jacket pocket and said that also, the protagonist needed to find time for a vacation. Alan asked in surprise, "What do you mean, vacation?" Luan asked if it was easy for him to live in the castle. He handed over Hilda's letter and said that in fact, his brother just needed to make a small delivery. The first prince asked him to visit Hilda's estate, where their sisters lived. Alan, looking at the letter, thought that he was interested in this place. He asked with a tired look if he really had to go there. Luan said smiling that he made it the reason why the protagonist needs to leave the castle. Hilda's estate is preparing for its hunting season. There, Alan will not need to maintain the image of a prince. The brother will be able to make himself any weapon and walk around the estate. The protagonist should definitely enjoy his vacation to the fullest. There you can also meet beautiful girls. Alan said that they will end there. Luan said that in any case, the brother should convey his greetings. The protagonist calmly took the letter and agreed with him. He said that he will take into account his brother's request and rest a little. After some time, a statue stands in the courtyard among the rays of the sun. Alan looks away holding flowers in his hand. He thought it was a statue of a princess protecting her son from a vampire attack. The protagonist walked up to the stage and bowed, laying down the flowers. He said it was time to go to the Hilda estate. After a while, Alan smiled and lay down on the sofa and said loudly that it was very good. He remembered the past. Charlotte, holding a scroll in her hand, asked for forgiveness and said that she needed to go to one place. Harmon closed his eyes and said that he also had a lot of work left. The protagonist, smiling, came out of his memories and wondered how long he had not parted with these two. So that's how it is to feel freedom. Alan pushed the curtain aside with his foot and said that the weather for a walk was just good. He quickly closed the curtain without finishing. The protagonist angrily raised his hands, remembering the past. Luan, smiling, raised his finger up and said that he was worried because there was no one to accompany his brother. He asked him to take a bloody cross with him just in case. Alan came out of the memories and thought that he certainly felt more confident, but he felt very gloomy with them. He shouted loudly as he rose up in the shaking carriage. The protagonist looked out the window in surprise and asked what was wrong. The man looked at him sternly and said that there was a carriage opposite. Before he could finish speaking, someone loudly ordered the carriage to stop. The man loudly said that he didn't know where such people came from, but they would have to give them everything they had. The man from the bloody cross turned to His Highness and said that it looked like a group of bandits. The protagonist asked, "Don't they look like a group of fools? Are the bandits sure they want to attack them?" The man asked His Majesty, "Does he really see them that way?" The bandit loudly asked what they were doing. The bandits would let them go if they gave them all their things. Alan calmly closed his eyes and said that he heard that there was a festival going on at the Hilda estate now. Apparently, the bandits mistook them for a circus troupe, so they shouldn't hit them too hard. The man from the bloody cross looked at him and said that they would just cut off their limbs then. The protagonist thought about it. He said not to hit them too hard. What are these scary guys? Alan felt relieved because this situation turned out to be such a stereotype. A traveler who is attacked by bandits and a protagonist who kills the bandits. Of course, the protagonist is just controlling other people. A monster with red eyes looks forward while sitting in the bushes. He quickly jumped towards the bandits. One of them looked fearfully into the open mouth of the monster. A bright beam of energy instantly cut the bandit's neck. They sat down on the ground in fear and said loudly that it was a monster. The man said loudly that it was the main monster. What the hell is going on here? Alan looked forward in fear, opening the carriage door a little. He thought he could smell an unpleasant odor seeping through the smell of wet moss. Those red eyes and sharp teeth, it's a werewolf. The monster quickly moved upward. The man from the bloody cross asked, "Is it a werewolf?" Judging by its wolf-like appearance. Maybe because it is just a creature. Usually creatures are weak in physical strength, but they are very contagious. Alan said loudly, then they need to deal with the main monster first. He quickly created a weapon in his hand and loudly ordered everyone to prepare for battle. He wondered, how strong is this werewolf? Alan does not want to overexert himself because he has just recovered his strength. He remembered the past. The protagonist asked, "Is this just a vacation? Does one think that this is a bit too much?" The first prince said with a smile that they are coming with him not only as an escort, but also for their own business. He heard that they need to do something at the Hilda estate, so one thinks it would be a good idea to combine them. He will also prepare different carriages for both of them in case they are uncomfortable being with each other. So Alan should not quarrel with Raphael. The protagonist, looking sternly to the side, came out of the memories and loudly addressed the archbishop, saying that it was a werewolf. He knew that Raphael did not like him, but he had to separate personal relationships from work. The door quickly bent forward. It instantly flew at great speed towards the werewolf. The monster looked at the door approaching him in fear. He quickly flew to the side, shaking the ground from the blow he received. The archbishop, lowering his hand, said that these undead were half people, half animals. He hit the ground with his staff, creating circles of energy. Raphael, with a terrifying look, enveloped in energy, asked the werewolves to allow him to give them eternal peace. Alan thought that he was worried that the other werewolves would come running to the sound of howls. The werewolves ran furiously to the side, roaring. The archbishop instantly delivered a powerful punch to the monster's face. The werewolf flew back at great speed, cutting through the air. Raphael clenched his fist with an ominous look. The protagonist thought that it seemed like he didn't need to worry. When the archbishop said he needed to do something, did he mean hunting monsters? Is Alice here to help the victims? Alan thought with a frightened look, does that mean he needs to work here too? This can't be, why is he even thinking about such things while on vacation? The werewolf quickly headed towards him. The man from the Red Cross loudly addressed His Highness, and said that the monster was on the right. The protagonist quickly looked at the werewolf holding a weapon in his hands and loudly called him a freak. The arrow flew to the side at great speed, cutting through the air. The monster roared after receiving a powerful blow to the head. Alan lowered his head with a tense look. He looked to the side and asked, "What was that?" An arrow just flew by. Hilda Alphons, 24 years old, interrupted him loudly and said that there were more werewolves ahead. Raphael raised his hand and quickly looked to the side. She, sitting on a horse, loudly ordered to kill them all. The werewolves looked at the approaching green cross with fury. The green cross said loudly that those freaks were running into the forest. Hilda stopped and told them not to follow them. The forest is the territory of those monsters. She confidently looked ahead and said that they should not get involved in a losing fight. Hilda, getting off her horse, said that they had not seen the priest and Alan for a long time. The protagonist looked at her in surprise and agreed with her words. Hilda, approaching his face, said that he had become a completely different person. She heard the news, but did not expect such changes in 6 months. Alan has changed a lot. Has he really lost his memory? The protagonist, with a surprised look, agreed with her words. Hilda asked to let her introduce herself then. She, smiling, looking to the side, introduced herself. The system window notifies that she is the mistress of the territory of Hilda, agile and very good at weapons. She, turning to her younger brother, said that they will talk about the rest in the castle. This is what Alan saw on the way to her castle. There are no signs of life on the streets, even the doors of the shops are closed. Just like the first prince said, there might be beautiful girls in this place. All the residents of the territory keep their doors closed, so the protagonists couldn't even see their faces. There were many attractions here, but each of them was decorated with werewolf corpses. Currently, Alan looked out the carriage window at the monster heads and wondered if by hunting season 1 meant werewolf hunting. What kind of place is this anyway? After a while, the protagonist angrily slammed his cup on the table and thought that this first prince is a freak. What kind of festival is this? Only the bloody festival can be seen here. Alan saved his life, and he sold him out? The protagonist needs to return to the Imperial Palace as soon as possible and deal with this fool. Hilda said that werewolves are different from vampires. They are the final form of a dead beast that absorbs mana for a long time. She held a letter in her hand and said that they are quite intelligent and have amazing physical strength. There were times when vampires tamed them with magic. They walked with them like pets. The werewolves that live here formed their own packs. Hilda looked at the protagonist and said that if you use magic against them, they will only become stronger. Alan asked, those werewolves did not even understand the language? She smiled and said that it was because they were creatures, and she was talking about werewolf parents. The protagonist asked with a puzzled look why she was telling him all this. Hilda asked with surprise, did not he come to help? She showed a letter in her hand and said that judging by the letter, the Holy Emperor gave it to her. Alan came to help. He lowered his head and put his hand on his face and said that these are fools. Hilda asked, so they decided everything without him? The protagonist said that he came here to enjoy the festival, and not to hunt. He raised his hand and said that if she wanted, he would leave her a red cross to help her. Hilda said that then things were really bad. In fact, the festival was supposed to be held next week, but it was cancelled because of the werewolves. Alan asked in amazement, so his brother didn't tell him a complete lie? She smiled and confirmed his words and said that therefore he shouldn't be so angry with him. Luan did this because everyone wanted to see the protagonist's talent. Although it was impossible to hold the festival now, she would still help him with everything else. Alan clenched his hand into a fist and asked what she meant. Hilda looked to the side, raised her hand and ordered Blorg to come in. Blorg, a blacksmith working for the Imperial Palace, introduced himself as he entered the room. Hilda said that she heard that the protagonist wanted to find a suitable weapon here. Blorg was the best fit for it. Even though Alan was her half-brother, she had no intention of sending him into danger. Hilda raised her hand with a smile and asked her brother to stay inside the citadel while he waited for the weapon. The protagonist looked ahead with admiration and thought that he couldn't believe that there was someone in this empire who understood him so well. He thanked his sister loudly. The blacksmith pointed his hand towards him and asked if he had a main weapon. Alan said that he used a shovel. He didn't know what weapon suited him the best. The protagonist just used his shovel because he had been digging for half a year when he was exiled. Blorg asked if he could show him his hands then. Alan held his hand out towards the blacksmith. Blorg said that this hand was not at all trained for weapons. He scratched his cheek with his finger thoughtfully, and said that it wasn't that he couldn't make a shovel. Don't they think that it wouldn't be effective enough if he used only that? The blacksmith closed his eyes and said that they could think about what would suit him the best. Hilda asked if it wouldn't be easier to find a weapon that suited his personality. She put her hands on her knees and asked if Blorg could call the servants. The blacksmith turned to Her Highness and asked if she really wanted to do something. Hilda said that she wanted to ask them to clean up the training grounds. She quickly slammed her fist into her hand. Hilda smiled maliciously and said that she hadn't fought with her younger brother for a long time. She even missed it somehow. Alan closed his eyes with an angry smile. He looked at her and said that he would like to refuse. Hilda put her hands on her hips and said that he didn't have to worry, she wouldn't be bad. If the protagonist really didn't want to fight, then she would only defend herself. Alan thought with a puzzled look that it would really be more comfortable if he could find a comfortable weapon for himself. He confidently looked at her and asked her to take care of him. Hilda smiled and agreed with him. She asked if they could go to the training grounds then. After a while, she quickly jumped to the side and said loudly that this was a spear, then a mace and a sword. Hilda loudly addressed Alan and told him to try hard. Chains, an axe, a sickle, there were still too many weapons that they had not tried. The protagonist, looking tired, sighed heavily and thought, are there really so many more? Hilda loudly said that this time they would try brass knuckles. Now there would be an axe, chains and a pot. Alan was sitting on the ground with a pot on his head. Hilda said that although he was only her half-brother, she was sorry that she could not take good care of him. The protagonist, looking tired, lifted the pot from his head. The sister, putting her hand on her side, asked, was this their first meeting since Ulysses' funeral? Back then, Hilda was too small and busy because of the inherited territory. When she heard rumors that Alan had become a freak, she could not believe that he had changed so much. She looked at him smiling and said that she now believed in it. Hilda does not know what happened to him while the protagonist was in exile. She thanked him with a joyful look for Alan to visit her. Hilda said that as long as he was here, she would definitely take care of him. The protagonist looked away in amazement and turned to his sister. Hilda raised her hand smiling